Dear participants, welcome you all to this second day of international webinar on reimagining literature and culture in the age of pandemic, organized by the Department of English in association with Kerala State Higher Education Council. I request Dr. P.M. Abdul Shakir, Principal, to have the welcome speech. Over to Shakir, sir.
Okay, thank you. Respected patron of our college, Shri P.V. Abdul Wahab MP, distinguished resource person of this session, Dr. Ajay Shekhar, Assistant Professor of English, Sanskrit University, Kaladi, Dr. Shireen P. Assistant Professor, Department of Comparative Literature, English and Foreign Language, University, Hyderabad. Dear academicians, research scholars, students, and other participants of this webinar, a warm good morning to all of you. As you all know, we are living in a very extraordinarily difficult time in human history. The whole world is facing one of the worst crises in its history. COVID-19 pandemic has deeply affected all aspects of human life. It's becoming very apparent that it has the potential to reshape and restructure this world and its varied realities. This webinar is a humble attempt to make a comprehension of these altered realities. Specifically, it looks at, from a critical perspective, how art and literature and culture in general are reimagined and restructured in the age of pandemic. The webinar conducted by the PG Department of English of Amal College today actually. Yesterday we had a session by Professor S. Shankar from Hawaii University. He has been talking on the topic contagion, truth and metaphor. Today we are going to have two sessions, one by Dr. Ajay Shekhar from Sanskrit University, Kaladi. He'll be speaking on the topic pandemic and pandemonium, survival through art and culture in states of exception. And that session will be followed by a session by Dr. B.S. Sharing from Hyderabad University, English and Foreign Language University. Dr. Sharing B.S. will be speaking on the topic Gendering the Pandemic, questions on the domestic space. Before we move on to the session, let's have a brief inaugural session. It's our great pleasure that we have the presence of our honorable patron of our college, Shri P.V. Abdul Wahab MP here in this webinar. As he had a very busy schedule yesterday, he was not able to join for this program yesterday. Wahab sir is an esteemed member of Parliament, Raj Sabha, and a former member of Parliamentary Committee for Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India. He is a recipient of UNESCO Confucius Prize for Literacy. He is one among the very few Indians who have been honored in the House of Lords in the British Parliament. So we are really honored by your presence in this webinar. I would like to extend a warm and hearty welcome to you, sir, to this program. I would like to extend a warm and hearty welcome to our resource persons, Dr. Ajay Shekhar and Dr. B.S. Sharing, to this webinar. Let me welcome the teachers, academicians, research scholars, and students from different universities and colleges all over India who participate in this webinar. With great pleasure, let me invite our honorable of our college, Shri P.V. Abdul Wahab MP, for making the inaugural remarks. Thank you. Dear friends, our patron, Shri P.V. Abdul Wahab MP, will join within a short while. Before that, let me invite Dr. Jafar Sadiq, Assistant Professor in the Department of English, Amal College, for introducing the resource person today, Dr. Ajay Shegar. Jafar, you may please. Over to you, Jafar. You may please.
Hello? Hello? Am I audible right now?
You're audible. Continue.
Okay. Thank you. So, I'm so happy to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Ajay Shegar. Dr. Ajay Shegar is an assistant professor in the Department of English at Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kaladi. Dr. Ajay Shegar is a renowned teacher, researcher, writer, translator, painter, and photographer. So today we have a versatile writer. His doctoral thesis is on the caste and gender margins represented in post-colonial Indian fiction written in English and in modern Indian languages. His areas of research interest include post-colonial subaltern studies, cultural studies, race and ethnicity studies, gender and caste studies, Kerala modernity, Dalit studies, and new literature. He has been immensely contributing for Dalit, Bahujan, and Buddhist studies. He was awarded Adyar Deepam Award in 2014, Sahodarin Sahitya Puraskaram in 2015, and Lord Buddha Universal Award in 2017. Ajay Shegar's critical writing and translations are published in various journals and books, both in Malayalam and English. He has presented many papers and given lectures in national and international conferences. His major works are Representing the Margin, Unknown Subjects, Songs of Poigai Appachan, Writing in the Dark, a selection of Dalit poetry from Malayalam. Irutile Keli is a translated work of Toni Morrison's Playing in the Dark. Samskaram, Pradinidhanam, Pradirodham, and Sahodaran Ayyappan towards a democratic future, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. In this way, he has written, these are some of the titles of the books that he had written. Recently, in 2018, he wrote Puttan Keralam, Kerala Samskaratinde Bauddha Adidhara. So in this way, Dr. Ajay Shegar is a great personality that we are so blessed to get him today as a speaker for today's session. He has been immensely contributing for the academic or the scholarship through his lectures, his activism, through and page and stages. So this, I wholeheartedly, I welcome Dr. Ajay Shegar to this international webinar. Thank you, sir. Once again, I welcome you to this session, Dr. Ajay. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, and I hope I am audible. Good morning to you all, and thank you very much for the generous introduction that was given by Jafar Sadiq, my friend. And I'm really thankful to the college, the principal, the department, the HOD, the other teachers, and my friends who have invited me for this very timely and relevant contemporary kind of an international, truly international seminar at Amal College, Nilambur. I'm also truly delighted and honored to join you this morning to discuss about some of the very pertinent and serious issues in the present when our country and the whole world is going through a difficult time. As we know, the time of the pandemic. The time of the pandemic has created extreme cases of exception, states of exception all over the world, and we are facing the calamities. So without further introductions and initiations, let us go straight into the topic of our lecture and discussion today. That is the pandemic, about the pandemic and the pandemonium that is created through this emergency of the world, and how the states across the world, the nation states across the world, how they have tackled it, how they have responded to this serious issue, and how certain emergencies are created all over the world, not just in our country, but in the Western world also. As in the case of America or Europe, we are having different states of exception. Philosophers of the world, especially French, European philosophers, and also philosophers and writers and political observers and sociologists from various parts of the world, they have responded and evaluated the situation. And the leading philosophers of the world, like the post-structural philosophers of France, they have responded to it. Italian philosopher, Italy was really severely affected by the pandemic, and we have seen the massive loss of life in Italy. The Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben, he was constantly tracking the development of the pandemic in Europe and in Italy, and he has also given us an insightful observation in his various articles from the beginning of this year, from early 2020 onwards, from January onwards. He has been constantly writing about the COVID situation and the socio-political impacts of the pandemic, what kind of a pandemonium that is being created by the disease, this pestilence all across the world, especially in Europe and America. And what are the responses of the regimes all over the world, especially from Europe and America? He has tried to theorize that situation. He has tried to see a general pattern. Agamben has traced a general pattern in the kind of condition, in the kind of emergency state that is created in this global pandemic. According to Agamben, the state is becoming more and more powerful. It is not a withering away of the state, as some of the universalists have claimed earlier, but it is actually a consolidation of the state. The state power is getting consolidated because a state of emergency is created. Though it is a medical kind of emergency, there are restrictions on civil life. There are military kind of interventions in public sphere. The police kind of brutality is growing all across the world. We have seen the cases not just from Europe, but from America also, the police brutality. We have witnessed the brutal killing of George Floyd, the African-American man on the streets of the United States by the police, a white police officer, almost an aged senior citizen, a 60-plus man, white man, choking him to death and brutally murdering him under the daylight. We have seen that thing. It was it was really received by the whole world with awe and agony and pain. We have experienced that pain as we are experiencing the pain from the Pettivudi destruction, the natural calamity that just happened in Munnar, in Rajamali. So that kind of brutalities we have seen from all across the world. So in the light of these authoritarian developments, in the light of the fascist kind of formations all across the world during the pandemic, Italian philosopher here, Giorgio Agamben, has come up with the observation that the state is becoming more and more totalitarian. The state brutality is growing. The state surveillance is on the rise. The surveillance state has exceeded into the limits of a civilized nation state, a republican state with a constitution and having a dignity for human rights and other what you call civil liberties. So all these civil liberties, all the civil rights, all the human rights are under erasure. Utilizing this emergency state or state of exception, a state of exception is created and a new normality, a new normal is created through the surveillance and military kind of infiltrations into public sphere and human rights at large. It is happening all around the world, not just in Italy or Europe or in America, but it is happening in India also. So anyway, the observation of Agamben about the rise of the totalitarian state, about the rise of the surveillance regime, about the state becoming more and more totalitarian and powerful and consolidated and entrenched with all its paramilitary and surveillance forces of control and regulation and governmentality. He develops it from Foucault onwards. So we have that from the birth of the prism. From 1970s onwards, you have that discourse on the rise of totalitarian, on the power regimes, on the panopticon vision, on what you call the gaze of the sovereign. That is developed, extended from Foucault, and very aptly, Agamben, the Italian philosopher, he has provided the world with this new insight that the powerful centers, the centered forces of power, especially the nation state, it is becoming more and more autonomous and sovereign and over-powerful and authoritarian and even totalitarian kind of regimes are created all over the world. So this postulation, observation, key stance of Agamben, I would like to pitch at this kind of an observation, because we also need to contrast it with the observations and positions of other writers and philosophers, the leading critics and philosophers of the world, like Slavoj Žižek, for example. Slavoj Žižek, early this year, he has made a prediction, very optimistic kind of prediction, that though we are stricken by the pestilence, though we are in the contagious kind of disease, it is capturing us one by one, but still there is a possibility to challenge the dominant form of the world order. The geopolitics of capitalism may be crumbled. Capitalism is under siege and attack. It is being deconstructed. This is going to be the collapse of capitalism. That was the prediction, the early political observation that was made by perhaps a slightly over enthusiastic kind of a prediction, optimistic kind of prediction, the freedom of will, the optimism of the will, if you use the term from Antonio Gramsci, as a man influenced by the Neo Left, speaking after the Neo Left and Gramscian cultural turn in critical theory and Marxist philosophy in particular. Zizek was a little bit carried away by that optimism of the will, rather than the pessimism of the intellect, which perhaps you can see the positions, difference in the position in the pessimism of the intellect in Agamben, and the optimism of the will that Gramsci elaborated in his prison notebooks, that you may identify, we may very briefly or in a contextual way, we may identify it with the optimism in the prediction of Slavoj Žižek. Anyway, we appreciate that optimism of the will, which Gramsci has also inspired us with. But anyway, we also need to look at the pessimism of the intellect, the intellectual kind of, more critical kind of elaborations and analysis are also important in understanding the extent and the gravity of the seriousness, the severity of the situation during the global pandemic. So though Zizek has explained it as, he has foreseen the collapse of the capitalist system in the pandemic, but we also have the Agambenian kind of warning, which is more serious and which is more apt and relevant and significant, even outside Europe and America, especially in the third world, in South Asia, in places like India. The warning, the lasting philosophical and political warning of Agamben that the state is becoming more and more totalitarian, that is to be listened, that is to be understood, that is to be discussed, that is to be seriously engaged in our own context. That is my humble submission regarding that. But we also have to compare it with other responses from the reading critical minds in the world, especially from the field of gender studies and all, queer theory and gender studies and all. You have Judith Butler, for example. Judith Butler, the German intellectual and writer and the so-called inventor and leading exponent of gender studies in contemporary world. Judith Butler has made also, she has made a comment that she has written an article specifically on the COVID development, and she has argued that this pandemic is going to create a kind of equality. A kind of leveling is going to happen because we are all human beings and we are all reduced to the kind of bare life. She doesn't use that word of Agamben, the bare life and the homo sacer and the state of exception and all those things popularized by Agamben, but she argues in a similar fashion that this is going to create a kind of equality. This is going to create a kind of leveling in the world because we are all human, we are all facing the biological or medical kind of insurgency, and the pandemic has become a kind of leveler, and a kind of equality is being created through this pandemic, and there is a possibility. It is, she views it as a kind of radical equality. A radical equality is being created by the COVID-19 virus. We don't know how much, to what extent it is possible, or it has become materialized. We can see that only in deaths we are equalized, or we are leveled. We are raised to the ground. That is true. We are not given a proper or a conventional kind of burial. We are getting some kind of burial. We are having the group burials and all those things. In that sense, as we have seen in the case of the Petimudi disaster recently, they are all buried alike. In Italy or America, we have seen the mass grave system and all. So at least in death, we are equal. That is always, it is the same. Only the funeral rituals may change, or the coffin may be a little more costlier, or you can have a burial without the coffin, you can have it with the coffin, you can have an AC kind of coffin, you can have a gilded one, but all those gilded tombs may worms enfold, says Shakespeare. So there is equality in death, that we know from Shakespeare's own times, or from the beginning of the civilization, from Renaissance period onwards. At least we have the coffins having the worms in it. So in death we are equal, but apart from that, in our life, in our medical treatment, in access to medical and other kind of facilities, what is the kind of equality that we are receiving, especially not just in the third world like India, but in America also? What is the kind of equality that we are receiving as far as medical care and the emergency situations are concerned? It is a real issue. It's a question that is still to be explained and adequately analyzed. So anyway, though Judith Butler argues that it creates a radical equality, COVID has created a radical equality. It is only in principle, and it is only in terms of death that we are receiving that in material terms in this world. So I just briefly introduce these three positions by the leading philosophers of the world. One by Agamben about the totalitarian state in the time of the pandemic, the state creating a pandemonium, a demonic other world, a new world of disorder and chaos and statist kind of regime, statist state, a statist regime, totalitarian regime, getting more and more rooted and consolidated during the days of the pandemic, and infringing upon, curtailing, heavily coming down upon human rights and equality and notions of justice in particular. The notion of justice and truth are being distorted and manipulated for the power elite, for the ruling elite, for the advantaged group, not just in Europe and America, but it is happening in India. We will see in a short while. We will come to India and try to analyze the situations. So anyway, these three positions are could be, you may take it as yardsticks or parameters or basic launching grounds, the grounds on which we set this debate on the pandemonium that is created during the pandemic especially by the forces of authority, the state in particular, statist regimes, how they have come down heavily on the human rights issue and issues of justice, social justice in particular, in the case of India, and even in Kerala, what is the situation we need to analyze. So these, with these invocations of Agamben, Foucault through Agamben, and Zizek, the Marxist critique, Zizek and also Judith Butler, their own respective positions and observations on the pandemic and the chaotic situation, the pandemonium that is created. We may move on to perhaps the second part of my lecture, that is about the kind of chaos, about the kind of misrule, about the kind of disorder, the noisy discordance that is created, not in the positive way. I'm not talking about the polyphony. When you talk about, because the post-colonial theorists like Clement and others, they have theorized the discordance, the cacophony of post-colonialism and the new emerging literatures all across the world. I'm not talking about, in this particular lecture, I'm not talking about that kind of a positive polyphony or a noisy discordance or cacophony of diversity and difference, but here the fundamentals of justice and truth are being disordered or are deliberately made chaotic, and in that noisy discordance something negative is happening, something anti-people is happening, something totalitarian is happening, something fascist is brewing, especially in India. And it has been brewing for the last 30 or 40 years in India, at least for from the beginning of this century, the 21st century. We know the rise of the Hindu nationalism to power, the coming of age of Indian fascism or the Hindutva wave of fascism, the mobilization of people against the constitutional ethics itself, because the Constitution guarantees a democratic state. The Constitution guarantees a secular state. The Constitution guarantees a primary relevance to justice, social, political, and economical. So social justice is the key. Social justice is the foundation of the Indian Constitution that is being tampered with, that is being done with during the days of the COVID. And even before the days of the COVID, it has been there, that kind of what you call evil propagandas and hate campaigns against social justice and those who speak for social justice. And they were otherized, they were animalized, they were demonized, and they were done with. So that is the condition in India. That is what we need to see or critically evaluate and analyze. What is the pandemonium that is created in India in the last decade or in the last couple of decades, so to say, from the beginning, at least from the beginning of the 21st century, from 2000 AD, 2000 onwards, what happened in India? How did the nationalist forces, the cultural nationalist forces, not the nationalist forces proper, but the forces of cultural nationalism, how did they come to power? How did they manipulate the mandate of the people? And how did they usurp into power, misusing the constitutional provisions and the fundamental processes of democracy? That is an issue at stake. That is what we need to critically look at in order to correct our mistakes and in order to struggle hard and fight hard for the lost constitution, the already suspended, the already partly deconstructed and demolished state of ethics in our country, the only record of ethics and justice in the country, that is our constitution. But unfortunately, through systematic kind of propaganda, through systematic propagation of anti-justice campaigns, anti-social justice campaigns, how it was dismantled by the forces of cultural nationalism after their usurpation to power through misusing the processes of democracy, the ballot system, the voting system. All these things, we have been using it for the last 50 or 60 years of our constitutional democracy since 1950s, since Baba Saheb and others have created our constitution. It was intact for the almost intact, but I won't say perfectly intact, but it was surviving. It was not done with. The base, the fundamental, the basic ground of Indian constitution, the civil rights and the fundamental rights and the what you call the social justice paradigm, the social equality and justice paradigm, the social democracy paradigm of the Indian constitution that was created by Baba Saheb through a life of dedication and education and brilliant kind of political interventions in the drafting committee of the constitution, what he led, what he created, what he declared as modern democratic values, the fundamentals of the modern democracy, the values of liberty, equality, and fraternity. All these things are under erasure, under threat, under surveillance, under strict kind of repressive kind of regimes today. So that is what we need to look into. So this began much earlier, before the COVID, from the beginning of the 21st century, and Indian education was the first target. So the forces of cultural nationalism or totalitarian kind of tendencies, pro-fascist tendencies in India, they have targeted the education system first, the history books first, the textbooks of India, the school textbooks and the college textbooks and the university syllabus, they have tried to monopolize and manipulate. That is why something called saffronization was there in the air in the beginning of the 2000s when the Vajpayee regime came to power. They have initiated something called the saffronization of education, the Hinduization of the textbooks, the history erasure and additions are being appended to the history textbooks. Many things about real history was erased and deleted, and many things were put in place. And unfortunately, this was again done with the help of certain people from Kerala. Unfortunately, a Kerala scholar was paraded as lifted to Delhi as the ICHR chairman. And we know about Sudarshan Rao and others. Another ICHR chairman who was interested only in the Mahabharata, only in the epics and Puranas, and he was his life objective was to date the Mahabharata. That was the like dating the Indus Valley civilization, or what we have seen from Kiradi or from Pattanam. He was interested in that epic and the dating of the carbon dating of that particular epic, so to say. People say that, critics are saying that. So this is not just my opinion. This was articulated by the major historians of that period. In the early 2000s, it was Sumit Sarkar and Romila Thapar and others, Irfan Habib and Romila Thapar and Sumit Sarkar and plenty of other leading scholars and intellectuals and historians of India. They have created the term saffronization. It's not my coinage. But new generations may not know that because it happened some 20 years back. That is why I'm reminding you about this trajectory of the pandemonium here. So it is not beginning with the COVID. It is not a serious situation that is solely created, exclusively created by the pandemic. But my point is that it was created early in 21st century, early this century, by the forces of cultural nationalism and totalitarian monopolism, majoritarian kind of spiritual fascism in our country, if you use the term from the other scholars from the Dalit Bahujan background. Kancha Ilaiya has written elaborately about the spiritual fascism of the Sangh Parivar. Even Sumit Sarkar, a mainstream historian, he has written about specifically an essay, a book titled The Sangh Parivar, the Fascism of the Sangh Parivar. In 2002 itself, it was published in 2000, early 2000s, in the beginning of this, at the wake of this century. So from Sumit Sarkar, we have it. From Gopal Guru, we have the critique. From Kancha Ilaiya, even foreign scholars like those who settled down here and became Indian citizens, like, for example, that woman, Gail Ometh, for example, she has written articles and books on this issue. So anyway, whether it is Gail Ometh or whether it is the other scholars, plenty of other scholars, even foreign scholars, they have written about this. Christoph Jaffrelot himself, he has written that reader about Hindu nationalism. Jyotirmaya Sharma has written about it. Amalendra Mishra has written about it. So many mainstream scholars and even international foreign scholars and our own historians and mainstream, and both Dalit Bahujan and also the so-called mainstream historians and scholars have written about it, the saffronization of Indian education. It began in early 2000 during the regime of Vajpayee and Pramod Mahajan and Murli Manohar Joshi and others. And basically, as we know, it's a post-Babari Masjid, post-Mandir Masjid kind of an issue. It began soon after the demolition of the Babari Masjid at Ayodhya in 96. It was brewing from then on. It was an anti-Mandal, anti-democratic struggle of the twice-born Asghar Ali Engineer and Gail Ahmed, they have written books on that. The twice-born riots against democracy. So it was basically an anti-constitutional, anti-democracy, because the Constitution is the book of social democracy and social justice in India. It is the Bible of democracy in India. And therefore, we need to address that issue. From it began much earlier, we know, the Hindu nationalism. We also need to trace briefly the legacy and the history, the genealogies of Hindu nationalism originating in 19th century, early 19th century, especially in Bengal, at the wake of the Bengal Renaissance, in the colonial modern, in the colonial intervention period, the wake of modernity in Bengal, that created Bengal Renaissance. But unfortunately, it was monopolized, a dominant stream from Bengal, which was a Hindu nationalist stream, which we will find in the writings of Aurobindo, Vivekananda, and Bankim Chandra. So these three doyens of the dominant form of Bengal Renaissance, which is called the Neo-Hindu kind of uprising within the Bengal. It has got various other forms. The Bhadra Log is there, the Chota Log is there, the Dalit Bahujan movements are also there. But unfortunately, the most dominant, the most consolidated, and the most centralized form of Bengal Renaissance was monopolized and dominated and carried away by the what you call the Hindu nationalist neo-Hindutva of Bankim Chandra, the Ananda Math, and the Bande Mataram kind of legacy. We know the otherizing nationalism, otherizing your own self as the other, parting your own self as the other. Self is determined as the other, marked as the other, stereotyped and reduced as the other. It's a highly gross kind of violent reductionism, reducing your own self, your own country, your own countrymen, your own brothers, your own neighbors, and your own relatives as the other. So that is, unfortunately, that is the system of inequality. That is the system of otherizing that was here in India. So it has an origin much before that, even before the Hindu nationalism of Bankim Chandra, Vivekananda, Aurobindo, Vande Mataram, and the Mlecha and Murchaya, they kind of otherizing and demonizing and slaying of the other, the genocidal kind of cultural nationalism, the fascist kind of formation, because cultural nationalism only is only another term for fascism proper. There are plenty of nationalisms that can become fascism. The majoritarian, only the majoritarian mobilization can become the fascism. And there are linguistic nationalism, there are cultural nationalisms, there are ethnic nationalisms. These can, when it becomes a majoritarian kind of a mobilization of the people, it becomes fascism proper, and it creates the genocidal kind of concentration camp. It creates the Holocaust. We have the examples in Antonio Gramsci's own Italy. He was in the prison house of Benito Mussolini. He died in that, he perished in that prison. But fortunately, his book survived, his thought survived. And that is what gives us a kind of intellectual edge against the fight against the totalitarian fascist tendencies even today. So anyway, it has an origin much beyond in history, in prehistory perhaps, and perhaps at least from the so-called Vedic age, from the beginning of the Rig Veda and the Purusha Sutta in it. It is having its beginning. So the Indian hegemony, the Indian totalitarianism, which is nothing but Brahmanism, historians and critics have called it, from Ambedkar to D.D. Kosambi. From Ambedkar, a liberal scholar, the architect of Indian Constitution, the leading jurist and socio-political scientist in the world, who received multiple research degrees from Columbia and University of London and Germany and many other parts of the world. He called it Brahmanism. And even in late 20th century, D.D. Kosambi, a Marxist historian, D.D. Kosambi, who studied the so-called Indian traditions very critically, he also called it Brahmanism. Brahmanism is the core so-called discourse that creates the Indian hegemony or the Indian ideology. Even today, even in the contemporary world, Marxism Marxist thinkers and critics like Perry Anderson and others from the West, they call it the Indian ideology or the Indian hegemony. It is nothing but Brahmanism or the Varnashrama Dharma. In other words, in Sanskritic terms, it is Varnashrama Dharma. So it is not just having an origin. In the modern world, it is having the origin in the Bengal Renaissance, in the Bande Mataram cultural othering of Bankim Chandra, Aurobindo and Vivekananda, in the Life Divine, in Gita, in Savitri and other poetic compositions of Aurobindo, and in the poetic compositions of Vivekananda and his writings in particular, the 3 volumes, you have that rise of the Neo-Hindu, the Neo-Kayastha Hindu, the Neo-Kshatriya or the Neo-Shudra, having its origin there in the Bengal Renaissance, in the Kayastha kind of Hindu uprisal. You have its origin basically in the so-called Vedic age, something between BC 3000 and BC 1500. BC 1500 is a crucial year because that is the devastation of the Indus Valley civilization, which was a Dravidian civilization, which was a peaceful civilization, which was based on bronze and copper and all, which was not a military or war kind of invading and aggressive kind of violent civilization. But unfortunately, because of various reasons, perhaps through foreign invasion by these forces of Vedic obscurantism, or through the ecological disaster, or through the environmental changes, or through the trade collapse with its Mesopotamia was its trade partner. It was having connections with the Far East, the West Asia, and even northern part of northeastern part of Europe. So anyway, because of various reasons, economic or ecological or religious or invasive kind of reasons, it was destroyed or devastated. Perhaps the climatic change, that could also be another reason. Plenty of theories are there. Anyway, from the destruction of the Indus Valley civilization, from which India is gaining its name. India is from Indus. Indus, the river. The river has given us the name. The River Valley civilization, one of the greatest and ancient civilization that could be compared with the Egyptian or the Greco-Roman or the Mesopotamian, and all those, the Chinese and other greatest civilizations of the world. So that was collapsed and that was devastated. And from that time onwards, you have the regime of caste and varna in India. And you have the ascendancy of priestocracy in India, something called Brahmanical patriarchy, which is the key term that is developed by Indian feminists like Sharmila Rage or Uma Chakravarti or Anupama Rao today. Brahmanical patriarchy, the double labyrinth, the double-edged sword of caste and gender, which is really oppressive and which is the most inhuman, most doubly edged, most deadly and dangerous, lethal kind of power structure and hierarchy in the whole world. So the hierarchy of caste was created in the Purusha Sukta, the manly hymn, Purusha Sukta, the masculinity prayer of the mandala in Rigveda, the Adi Veda, the Rigveda. In the mandala called Purusha Sukta, you have the strange queer origin story regarding the birth of the Brahman, the birth of the Kshatriya, the birth of the Shudra and the Vaishya. That is called the Chadurvarnyam system, the Chadurvarna system, or it is otherwise called the Varnashrama Dharma system. Unfortunately, even Gandhiji couldn't get out of this system. And though he was against untouchability and caste purity and pollution, he somehow indirectly propagated its message, its basic philosophy, its basic obscurantism called Varnashrama Dharma. He wrote and published and sold that book called Varnashrama Dharma from his Navjivan Press in Gujarat. Unfortunate case, like his composition of the ideal Bhangi. While Ambedkar was writing the annihilation of caste, as we know, as Arundhati Roy and others have told us, while Ambedkar was writing the annihilation of caste in 1936, Gandhiji was writing, unfortunately, the father of the nation, he was writing, Bapuji was writing, well, Baba was writing the annihilation of caste, how to do away with this caste, this ancient calamity, this most degraded, dehumanizing thing called caste system and its religion. Unfortunately, Bapuji was writing that ideal bhangi, idealizing manual scavenging, because he believed in the so-called Swadharma, something called Swadharma and Varnashrama Dharma, and it was Kula Dharma. It is nothing but Kula Dharma or caste calling or caste duty, which was imposed from generations to generations merely on the basis of descent and lineage. There was no scope for choice. There was no scope for selection. There was no scope for individual freedom and the will of the optimism of the will. Remember Gramsci. Unfortunately, this was the case. And even in the general, what you call the liberal kind of nationalism, this Varnashrama Dharma was there. So that is why Mahatma Phule onwards, they have, even before Gandhiji came from that bad experience from the South African prison and the South African railway cabin, he was kicked out of that cabin because it was reserved for whites only. The white only boards were there in South Africa. It was it was an apartheid regime. It was a blind racist kind of regime till 1990s, till the end of the 20th century. The long struggle, the long walk to freedom, Mandela and others we know. Anyway, this was the system which has its origin. India is really under this system from the so-called Vedic age onwards, after the devastation of the Indus Valley civilization, which was a Dravidian civilization, which was a peace-loving civilization. There was art and culture. We know it through its sculpture, its artifacts, its seals, its petroglyphics, or the pictorial kind of writing system, the strange system, which is also called, which is still incomplete in deciphering. Airavata Mahadevan and Asko Parpola and various other scholars, they have tried, they have somehow managed, but it is still evading a kind of comprehensive understanding. The epigraphists call it the kind of pre-Brahmi or the Indus Brahmi. Then you have Ashokan Brahmi, which was used by Ashoka, which is actually the Dharma Lipi, which was used by Ashoka to propagate the word of the Buddha, the gospel to the world, because he adopted the Dharma of the Buddha, the ethics of the Buddha as his constitution. And he inscribed it on stone in various stupas and on the pillar edicts, which is scattered all around South Asia, all around the peninsular India, and some are in China and Mongolia and Tibet and various other parts of the world. So anyway, unfortunately, after the Vedic age, or at least from the Vedic age, from the BC 2000, 1500 era, from that stage onwards, India was attacked, and India was infected, so to say. If you use the term from the pandemic, what is the pandemonium that is created by the pandemic? India was infected by this contagious contagious disease. That is the word that was used by Ambedkar to refer to this dominant discourse, the dominant religiosity in India, which is the base of the caste system or the Varna system. The origination, something that legitimizes it as religion, is Varnashrama Dharma or Brahmanical Hinduism. So this Brahmanical Hinduism or Brahmanism was called the dominant form of Hindutva, the base of Hindutva. The base of Hindutva agenda, cultural nationalism, is the values of Brahmanism, which is called the Sanatana Dharma, which is also called the Varnashrama Dharma. The Vedic Varnashrama Sanatana system, this was called the contagious disease, the contagion of India. India was stricken by this pestilence somewhere around BC 1500. Unfortunately, from there onwards, you have the infiltration of caste and varna into the society. Brahmanism, in order to maintain its own power, political power and patronage and centrality, it tried to divide the society on caste and varna lines. That is why they have improvised this Chaturvarnya system in the Purusha Sukta of Rigveda. And later it was also endorsed through the Gita by saying that I have devised, through putting it through the mouth of the Lord, that again the Sri Krishna Paramatma, the Virat Purusha, again in the Gita, he speaks that Chaturvarnyam is Maya Sustam. It is my own device. I have devised it on Guna and Karma. Chaturvarnyam Maya Sustam Guna Karma Vibhagacha. So it is, I have devised, the Lord, the God, has devised it as according to the work and deeds and qualities of the human beings forever. But we have the counterpoint. We have the counterpoint in Kerala Renaissance where Narayana Guru tried to question it. He is the one who has philosophically and theoretically negated and rejected it as an absurd thing. Guru countered it by saying that guna and karma are not staying. It is not fixed. Then how can you fix the varna and caste? Guna and karma can change at any moment. Yesterday's me is different from me. A couple of years ago, you were entirely different from what is your state today. So the subjectivity and human identity can also change. Human thoughts and actions can change. So our actions and deeds and qualities may change. Change is the only reality, as articulated by the Buddha or Marx later. Change is the unchangeable. There is nothing unchangeable as change itself. So everything is subject to change. Flux, anitya, that is the philosophy of the Buddha that teaches us about the permanent reality of change. There is no permanent reality. If at all any permanent lasting reality is there, that is change alone. That is what you call the anitya. Nothing is stable. Nothing is nitya, anitya. Or anekandavada. The Jains call it anekandavada or syadvada. It's also called anatma. Anatma or anich or anitya. That is, the anich is the Pali word for that. We find it in the Pali Tipitaka, after which our own South Indian epics like the Tirukkural was written by Thiruvalluvar in the beginning of the Common Era. So the South Indian tradition is entirely different. We were more influenced by the Pali canon and the Buddhism and Jainism and Ajivaka philosophy and Christianity and Islam and Judaism and many other philosophies from all across the world, because we were open to the world. South India, Kerala, for example, it was open to the world from the beginning itself. That is why we have the Jews coming here. We have the Judapallis still surviving in Kerala today. We have the Christians coming here. We have our own people embracing Christ here. We have Islamic missionaries coming here. And we have the first mosque, the Palli, outside Arabia, that is in Kodungalur, the Cheraman Palli, the Cheraman Masjid, the Jumaat Palli, the Cheraman Palli, which is having an ancient Buddhist legacy as well before the Prophet. So at least from the time of the Prophet, it became an Islamic kind of mosque or Palli. So we have the tradition of the Palli in South India. We have the tradition, it's a Pali word. All the non-Hindu people, they use the word Palli to refer to their place of worship. The sacred place is called Palli. It's a word of Pali origin. It came to Tamil, ancient Tamil or South Indian, Dravidian or the Damila or the Prakrut of the South. That is how Ambedkar has defined Damila or Tamila as the Prakrut, one of the Prakruts of the South. The Prakrut of Magadha is called Pali. Likewise, the Prakrut of South India, peninsular India, is termed as Damila or Tamila, from which the Dravidian, the English word Dravidian, the European word Dravidian has also emerged. So we have a different history and culture, and our own culture and art forms are against this, what you call the contagious disease, the disease against liberty, equality, and fraternity. That is the real, the real problem of India. which was identified from Buddha's onward times onwards. It was the critique of caste, the critique of Varna. We remember the Buddha because he was the first major voice, the first major philosopher, and first major social interventionist to challenge and question and refute the regime of caste and Varna. He totally rejected the Varnashrama Dharma of Brahmanism, and he also denied Brahmanical patriarchy. So caste and Brahmanism was challenged by the Buddha. That is why even the foreign scholar, the English woman who came and settled here, Gail, she has written that book. She has written the intellectual biography of Ambedkar towards an intellectual enlightened India, the biography of the Neo-Buddha of India, and also she has written about Buddhism challenging Brahmanism and caste. Buddhism challenging Brahmanism and caste by Gail Omweth, the sociologist, the English woman. It is well acknowledged by both the world, the critical tradition of the world, the scholarship of the world, the contemporary world has acknowledged it, and also the Indian Enlightenment tradition in modern times, as in Ambedkar, they have saluted it. And Ambedkar's masterpiece is after the Buddha and his Dharma, the Buddha and his ethics. The Buddha and his Dharma. Dharma in Pali means ethics, the laws of ethics, the laws of justice, truth and justice that is required for the sustenance of the whole world, that is called the Dharma. And unfortunately, a kind of mixing up with the Dharma of Sanskrit and the Varnashrama Dharma has happened in it. So that is why we need to use the original Pali, Dharma, and not Dharma, because Dharma, of course, refers to the Sanskritic and the Hindu Brahmanical notion of Varnashrama Dharma too. So what is Dharma in the Hindu epics and Puranas? It is nothing but Varnashrama Dharma. And that is why Lord Ram, he killed Shambhuga in order to save this Dharma, which is nothing but Varnashrama Dharma. Because Shambhuga was termed as a so-called Shudra. He was called a Shudra, an untouchable, or the last Varnam. Though they were Savarnas included in the Chaturvarnya, the Shudras were later adopted by Brahmanism and included as the fourth Varna in order to make them lifelong slaves of Brahmanism, in order to make them their militia so that they can oppress the untouchable, the real untouchable, or the Avarna, those who are outside the caste system or the Varna system. So we need to talk about it in the light of the South Indian Dravidian movement, which was originated by Pandit Ayodhi Thasar, a great Dalit leader of organic protest from Tamilagam, from the Nilgiris and Chennai. He operated, he went to Sri Lanka and he took Diksha from the Theravada monks there, and he became a Buddhist, and he came back with the help of Colonel Olcott and John Ratnam, Reverend John Ratnam and others, Anagariga, Dhamabala and all. He has created a new Dalit movement here in South India, which is which was also a spiritual kind of a movement, which was also a kind of social religious movement, you could say. The first Neo-Buddhism in South India was inaugurated by Pandit Ayodhi Thasar, even before Ambedkar, and even before Sahodaran and Midawadi in Kerala. It was Pandit Ayodhi Thasar who initiated in the 1870s itself. When British colonialism began its census, he asked the untouchables in Tamilagam to enlist as casteless people, as casteless non-Hindus or casteless Dravidians. So Dravidian movement, Dravida Mahajana Sabha, it was founded by Pandit Ayodhi Thasar, the Dalit leader, a Pali scholar and an English scholar and a Tamil scholar, of course. His grandfather was a butler of the British. So that is why they have learned English language for 3 successive generations. And Pandit Ayodhi Thasar has become a great scholar in English, Tamil and Pali also. He learned Pali also because as Dalits of South India, they were also having the legacy of Buddhism, the Tirukural legacy, the Aimperingapiyam legacy of Manimekhalai and Chilapadikaram and Kundalageshi and Jivaka Chindamani, Valayapati and all. So the fivefold great epics, the Aimperingapiyam of Tamil, the Agam and Puram poetry of Tamil, ancient classical Tamil that was translated by A.K. Ramanujan under the title Poems of Love and War for OUP. We can read it. So our own literary legacies, our own South Indian legacies, our own aesthetics, which is called the Thenai aesthetics of ancient Tamil, the fivefold Thenai aesthetics, Aim Thenai Vazhakkam, Aim Perungapiyam, all these are devised on the Panchashila, the fivefold precepts of the Buddha, and the Ashtanga Marga, the eightfold paths and the fivefold precepts of the Buddha. And that culture, the literary culture of South India itself is called the Sangham literature, or Changam. In Tamil, it is called a Changam. 3 Changams were there in Tamil history. So Changam or Sangam, it comes from Buddha's principles of the 3 jewels, or the 3 asylums that we have. That is Buddham, Dharmam, and Sangham. Buddham means enlightenment. Anybody can be a Buddha through education, through life struggle. So educate. That was the motto. That was the slogan that was given to youth by Ambedkar, the architect of Indian Constitution and the pioneer of Indian modernity after Phule and Guru and Ayodhidasa. Ambedkar has given us the motto: educate, agitate, and organize. Educate so that you are liberated, said the Guru in Kerala. Educate so that you are enlightened and you are liberated. And organize so that you are liberated. Educate that you are enlightened and free, and organize so that you are empowered. That is the statement of the Guru in Kerala. So he also has that Pancha Dharma principle after the Panchashila of the Buddha. And that is why his own disciples, Pandit Karuppan of Kochi, Mulur, the early Avarna poet in Kerala, and Sahodar Ayyappan of Kochi, they have called him as the Kerala Buddha, Kerala Puttar, or Kerala Buddha, or Narayana Buddha, because he was articulating the wisdom of the Buddha. So it was the Buddha who challenged the caste and Brahmanism in BC 6th century. And that is why he is remembered today. And it was Ashoka 200 years after the Buddha who came and elaborated about the Buddhist principles, and he adopted the Dharma, the ethics of the Buddha, in a very cosmopolitan and secular fashion, in order to spread his what you call governance, just governance. It was not an aggressive government. He abandoned sword. He was a Hindu. Ashoka was a Hindu, but he became great. H.G. Wells and other European scholars have termed Ashoka, the Mauryan emperor, as the great Ashoka, like the great Akbar. You have the great Ashoka because he abandoned the sword, he abandoned military, he abandoned all the violent weapons of mass destruction, and he adopted the ethical codes of the Buddha in order to maintain his province, in order to maintain his empire, the vast empire, the largest empire that was there during his lifetime, the Mauryan Empire, which we were in the margins of that empire. So the reference to Kerala, like Keraputto or Kedalaputto, it appears in the Dharma Lipi edicts of Ashoka. The edicts of Ashoka mentioned the people of Kerala as Keralaputto or Keralaputra in Sanskrit. It was in Pali. He wrote in Pali in the script called the Dharma Lipi, which was later termed as Brahmi, Ashokan Brahmi, by the Indologists, Orientalists, Max Muller and others. So anyway, at least from the time of the Buddha, this contagion, this disease was questioned. The disease of caste and varna, the disease of untouchability and unseeability, and unimaginable barbarism. It was resisted by the philosophy of the Buddha, who included, which was a democratic order. That is the importance of the Buddha. That is why Ambedkar proclaimed that it is from my master, the Buddha, and his Sangha, that I am taking the democratic principles or the modern values of democracy, liberty, equality, and fraternity, not just from the European education, the Western education, and the French Revolution model, but from my master, the Buddha, my Guru, the Buddha, and his Sangha, which was ordained or which was conjoined on the principles of democracy, inclusion, participation, representation, and freedom of speech. So these are the fundamental aspects of democracy that was liberated and recovered again in modern times at the wake of the colonial modern in India by Ambedkar, and in Kerala by Narayana Guru, and in Tamilagam by Pandit Ayodhi Dasar, and Mahatma Phule as a pioneer in the beginning of the 19th century. In 1840s itself, he gave his education. He was a Shudra, but he was denied education by saying that he is a Padaja or a Shudra, unworthy, like Shambhuga. He must be killed. If he tries to learn the art of letters, he must be killed. Even in Kerala, even a person, a bright child like Chattambi Swamigal was not given education in the Gurukula system. That is what the new educational policy, the the National Educational Policy, NEP 2020, 2016 draft, and 2020 now it is approved by the cabinet. I have been writing from 2016 onwards against it in both English and Malayalam. But unfortunately, the critical voices are not well accounted. If you raise the critique, you will be punished here. So that is what the fascist forces are doing, even through the left and right, through all the political formations. The Hindutva kind of agenda is operating, and they will punish you if you critique the system. And the hegemonic kind of tendencies that tries to dismantle the constitution and the ethics of the republic. So anyway, this is what is being the Pathashala system, the Gurukula system that is being that is what is being recommended by the new national educational policy 2020. According to that, Sanskrit must be given prominence, and the mother tongue, it is paraded as given a kind of slight dominant status, but behind the curtain or behind the mask, it is Sanskrit. If you read closely, if you read it critically, the new document, which is there in the new Education Ministry website. Earlier it was called the MHRD website. Still it is having that kind of a URL, mhrd.gov or something. But anyway, if you check that document from the Ministry of Education, Government of India, you will see that in the guise of mother tongue encouragement, outwardly, you see that it's a kind of what you call it's like the Avarna Shanti that was there in Kerala. The Avarna Shantis were appointed, but none could join duty because there was caste Hindu kind of resistance against it. And most of them, they abandoned the job, or they committed, some of them, a person from the community of Ayya Vaikuntham, who began this Kerala Renaissance from South Nanjinad. Establishing in 1836, he established the Samatva Samajam in Nanjinad, and he organized all the untouchables, and he fought against untouchability. He touched that rope in that Sujindram temple for that Swati Thirunal, the Sagala Kala Vallabhan, the jack of all trade and arts. He imprisoned him, and he put it into that Singaritop prison. And he was tortured, like the birth of the prison of Foucault. He was tortured, he was humiliated, he was killed inch by inch, but fortunately he survived. Taikadaya intervened, and somehow he was influential with the British residents, because the Britishers were the residents and the ruling elites there. Somehow he managed to acquit him. But 140 days of torture, that has nearly killed him. He couldn't do much after his release from Shingarithopu. He was tortured in the tiger panther den of Swati Thirunal, and also in that chili chamber, a chamber full of dried chili, where he was hanged topsy-turvy and he was mutilated. So anyway, from the days of Ayya Vaikuntha, you have that struggle. And you have that resistance against this Varnashrama Dharma, this Chaturvarnya religion, the regime of caste in Kerala, at least. And we have in Guru, you have the articulation caste as humanity. The caste of humanity is itself, or humanness. If animalness, if cowness is the caste of the cow, animalness is the, if animalness is the caste of the cow, or cowness is the caste of the cow, humanness or humanity at large could be the caste of the human being. That was the proclamation of the Guru. And he also wrote Jati Nirnayam and Jati Lakshanam by declaring that it is a species, Punarna Perunnadellam Urinam, that can procreate and that can embrace and procreate. It is the same species. He scientifically proved it. And his own disciples like Sahodaran and others, they have written elaborately about it. But unfortunately, the covert forces of casteism, the caste Hindu kind of elitism, it continued in disguise. It was created and recreated through the discourses of art and literature and culture. In the guise of the epics and Puranas, they have reoriented and re-established the casteist regime in Kerala. And through the Ramayana and Mahabharata recitals, which was actually we were warned against this kind of Mahabharata Pattatanam by Professor Ilangulam Kunjampiள்ளai himself in the 1950s, soon after the Renaissance. It was Professor Ilangulam Kunjampiள்ளai, professor of Malayalam, becoming an expert of Kerala history, a doyen and a pioneer of modern Kerala history. Ilangulam, he has warned in his writings against this Mahabharata Pattatanam or Mahabharata recitals, which was done by the scholars and pundits in order to Hinduize the people, the poor people, the Dalit Bahujans, the common people, the masses. They are carried away by the so-called literary and the cultural nuances and the recitals and the music and the ornamental bombastic language that is used and all those things, and they think it as something canonical. They think something as dogmatic, something which cannot be questioned, and they accept it without questioning. So the common people who take it for granted, they are beguiled. It's a mass deceit. It's a cheating of the people through which this Mahabharata and Ramayana recitals are operating. Along with it, Gita Giri Shibirams were also organized with the money of the taxpayers, with taxpayers' money, with the precious money that the working people like you and me are giving to the state. That money was used for the propagation of this through the official media. Even today, you have the bombastic Ramayana recitals from the early morning itself. You cannot switch on the radio. You cannot watch the media. Both the official media of the state and also even the private media, they are indulging in this kind of a continuous propaganda about Ramayana and Mahabharata. And what are these things? It was totally rejected by, these are the documents of otherization. These are the documents of animalization. These are the documents of genocide, genociding the other, animalizing and slaying the other. That is what is happening. Demonizing the other, demonizing your political opponent or religious opponent and trying to annihilate them, creating a discourse or slur against them and annihilating them. So that is what you see in the Ramayana. You find these monkeys and demons. What was done to Shurpanakha, what was done to Hidimbi, what was done to Tadaka, what was done to those Dalit Bahujans like Sugriva and Bali, how Bali was sniped, how that Kumbhakarna was killed, how Ravan was killed, how Mahishasura was killed. So Mahishasura or Ravan or Mahabali, all of them were South Indian kings. All of them resisted our National Dharma project of Brahmanism. For that, they were demonized and they were slayed. They were killed eventually. And that too, not directly, not in an open battle or not in a, not even in a war. Like when Tipu Sultan was killed in an open war with the British, defending his capital Srirangapattanam in 1799. So not even through that kind of a war or a Carnatic series of Carnatic wars, but through cheat and covet, through third-rate cheat, like Shambhuga, we have discussed Shambhuga. Shambhuga was mentioned by Sahodharan when Madan Mohan Malavya came to Kerala in 1920s, and he tried to raise that slogan, Jai Shri Ram, here in Tirunakara Maidan in Kerala, in Kottayam. It was outrightly rejected by Sahodharan Ayyappan and his brothers by saying that Ram, who killed Shambhuga, is not going to be our Lord. He's the least human. He's not even a human being. Then how can he become the killer? How can the bloody murderer of Shambhuga become the Lord of the Keralite? It can never happen. The reign of Mahabali or Ravan could be better. We know about Chandrasekhar Azad Ravan. So Sahodharan articulated in Jai Ravan, he said, Jai Ravan Azad Ravan. Sahodharan said in 1920, and Guru, because he was able to state this for Kerala Renaissance and modernity, Sahodharan was able to reject the name of Ram outrightly before the Madan Mohan Malavya agenda of Hindu Mahamandalam. Because he was the disciple of Narayana Guru, he proclaimed that it is the British who gave him sannyasam. Because if it was in the time of Rama, I would have met with the fate, that cruel fate of Shambhu. Okay, I think time constraint is there. Is there time constraint? Do we have to wind up the talk now? Okay. How much time we have? How much more time we have?
Sir,
how much time we have?
Time for, sir, we may wind up now and we may move on to the question answer session, the interactive session.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Right.
You may conclude, sir.
Okay, just a few more minutes. Let me conclude. So Ram was rejected by Kerala Renaissance. It was the Guru who proclaimed that Ram Raj is not acceptable to us, because in Ram Raj, we will meet with the fate of Shambhuga. So it is not acceptable. And also, in Jivakarunya Panchakam, he proclaimed that the killer has no virtue. He may be a great lord and a great Maryada Purushottam, but he is a killer. He has killed Shambhuga to Ravan, to all those Dalit Bahujans of South India and neighboring states like Sri Lanka. So the killer cannot be the king. The killer cannot be the god. The killer cannot be even a human being. Kullunnavaniilla Sharanyada. Matella Gunangalu Arnadilum. Kollaigil avan Gunamulla Puman, Alaigil Murgattinu Tuljanaman. So that was the Santra of Madan Mohan Malavya. So now, unfortunately, the people who are educated in this liberal system, but because of their caste Hindu background and affiliation, they are bringing back Ram as the truth principle of Gandhi, or as the whatever different Rams are being created. They talk about different Mapala Ramayanams and Adivasi Ramayanams and other Mahabharatams and so on and so forth. Whatever it is, these are the texts of otherizing. These are the legal texts of genocide. These are otherizing texts. These are demonizing texts. These are animalizing texts. These are texts and documents of genocide in the country. It has been proven and it has been rejected by Kerala Renaissance in early 20th century itself. So this is the unfortunate situation here. So in the cover of the pandemic, in the cover of the COVID crisis, a state of exception is being created, and one by one, in the cover of the night, we are facing this kind of new things or evils or subversions, and real subversion of democracy and the constitution is happening, and that must be resisted and rejected by the people. And young people in particular, only young students and researchers can do something about it. And I'm very eager to listen to the articulations and responses of the young students and researchers and teachers from all across India, they have joined, and outside, they are here. So thank you very much for this opportunity and the patient listening. And I'm eager to learn from you and listen to your perspectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. It was a highly insightful and informative talk. You have started your talk by mentioning the philosophers of the time, how they responded to this pandemic. Then, am I audible, Shanavas?
Yeah, audible.
And you moved on to the Indian condition, how India has already been afflicted with the pandemic of caste and varna system. Then you came to the context of South India, how historically we built a system. You elaborated on that, how historically we built a system to challenge the affliction of caste and varna system. It was a highly structured, thought-provoking, illuminating lecture talk on the topic. So thank you very much for giving us such a wonderful talk. Sir, shall we move on to the Q&A session, question answer session, sir?
Yes, sure. Yes. Thank you.
Our participants have posed questions here, but sir, Dalits in India are actually, you have mentioned that in your talk, they are already an afflicted people. They are afflicted by the pestilence of, we use that particular term used by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. They are afflicted by the contagion or pestilence of this caste varna system here. Sir, I would like to put this question to you. Sir, in what ways this present pandemic, COVID-19, has it made them more vulnerable? The Dalits in India, they are already a people afflicted by this pestilence of caste varna system. Has this COVID-19 made them more vulnerable, or in what are the ways it has affected them? Sir, please.
Yes, indeed, as we know from all the disasters, whether it is medical emergency or the natural calamity, it is the people at the bottom who are suffering the most, as we have seen from the Rajamalai. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So whether it is the natural calamity or the medical pestilence like this, it is the people at the bottom who are severely affected. So again, we need to create an awareness of this reality that we are going to be the losers. The majority of the people in India, the taxpayers on whose toil the nation survives, or the world is surviving, the producers of primary food and agriculture and industry and other labor and construction, and in every part and every walks of life, they are the basic producers or the fundamental working force of the world and this nation. So we are being affected. The people are being affected, especially the Dalits and the Adivasis. Look at the crisis in the tribal areas. So the Adivasis, the outcasts, the minorities, women, and working forces, Dalit Bahujans, and not the power elite. They can easily get out of the pandemic. They have all the medical facilities. They have all those provisions of the state. They are monopolizing it also. So we need to come together and we need to resist as a whole. Then we can end this kind of a pandemonic kind of a regime. So that we must make it into a political point, like the optimism of the will that I mentioned from Gramsci to Zizek. It is still surviving in Zizek. So that optimistic kind of a collectivity we need to show, and we need to come together. Nobody can resist this contagious disease, this pestilence alone. So we can come together and we need to develop further fraternities and camaraderies and further broader alliance against the pestilence of India, the internal imperialism of India, the divide and rule policy of Chaturvarnya, the Varnashrama Dharma can also be resisted as a whole. The people as a whole, when they resist, majority of people when they come together, the Dalits, the Adivasis, the minorities, women, and other radical groups and progressive groups, the democratic groups, when they come together, we can very effectively resist and challenge and make a survival. That is my optimism of the will. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. One participant, Mr. Nivedita Kumar, she comments on it. Shall I read this comment posted by that participant, sir?
Yes, please.
Brahmins alone wrote the magnificent literature about all aspects of life, earth, or even the universe. Hindus mostly are very liberal in their outlook, attitudes, and actions. So as per my understanding from your discourse, the majority of the nationalists pandemonium posing and democratic. Would you like to comment on it, sir? This is by Nivedita. Yeah.
Okay. So it is true that there are greater literary and so-called aesthetic works, but aesthetics alone cannot run the world. Aesthetic alone cannot sustain life and the liberation of all in this world. So we also need democracy. We are a democracy. We are not an aesthetic kind of theocracy. We are not a meritocracy. We are a democracy and we have a constitution. So the constitution is the fundamental book of survival. The constitution is the most beautiful work. That is the insight that we have from Kerala Renaissance. In Kerala Renaissance, Narayana Guru declared justice as the most aesthetic thing, the most what you call solemn beauty. When you remember, when you ponder, it is justice itself. Orkundorum Naranja Saundaryam, the fulfilling beauty, aesthetics is justice. There is no truth and no peace, no life without justice. If you are denied justice, there won't be peace. There will be struggle. There will be protest. There will be pandemonium will be there. So you cannot have a peaceful life without justice and truth and an adherence to justice and the ethical code or the principles of ethics that are enshrined in the Constitution. So therefore, we need to think beyond aesthetics and beauty, mere beauty, and we need to think of the well-being of all the beings on earth. So that is where ethics is more appropriate than mere beauty. Mere beauty can deceive you, and you can smile and be a villain. The patrons of art, look at Hitler, or the man in Robert Browning poetry. He can kill his wives, but he is a patron of arts. So that is what Brahmanism is all about. It can appreciate and create as the so-called art and classical art, but at the same time, it's all done at the expense of the people at the bottom. Those who create the drums, they cannot carry and play it. But when the drum is created from cowhide, it is created from cowhide, but that can be taken into the temple. But the so-called creator of that drum or the percussion instrument using the leather instrument, he cannot go there. That is what Guru also asked. If the leather chapel, it is on your feet, you cannot take it into the temple. But if it is the leather hide is on the drum, it is taken to the sopana, to the sanctum sanctorum. What is this absurdity? അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് സായിപ്പിന്റെ ഭരണം കൊണ്ട് ഒരുപാട് ഗുണങ്ങളുണ്ട് എന്ന് ഗുരു പറയുന്നതിന്റെ ഒരു കാരണം ഇത് തന്നെയാണ്. കന്നിൻ തോല് കാലിൽ ചേർന്നാൽ അതിന് വിരോധവും, അതേസമയം ചെണ്ടയിലാണെങ്കിൽ അത് അകത്തേക്ക് കൊണ്ടുപോവുകയും ചെയ്യാം. So what is this absurdity? What is this ridiculousness? What is this double speak? So that is the take on the aesthetics and ethics debate as far as I am concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. One George Matthew asked this question. Why did we also have illiterate people who could be manipulated by corrupt missionaries in spite of the magnificent Brahmins and the literature? Maybe the Varnashrama Dharma didn't bother to be inclusive enough to the masses. He's focusing on that. Varnashrama Dharma was not that much inclusive enough to be inclusive enough to the masses. And this is what he is asking.
Okay, that is a good observation. Thank you for that. That is the reality. It is an exclusionary system. It's an elitist system. It is called the stratified surveillance system or graded inequality by Ambedkar. So it is never inclusive. It excludes the vast majority of people as untouchables. That is the anti-democratic part of it. It expels the Avarna, the Dalit Bahujan, and people of the other religions also as others. And inferior status is provided to women of all Varnas and castes. They are all equal to Shudra, and Shudras are supposed to be inhuman kind of slaves, lifelong slaves to the other Trivarnika. So it is an unequal system. It is a greater inequality. It casts away the majority of people, and it is never inclusive and democratic. That is why it must be totally rejected, and its literature should also be rejected.
Sir, Dr. Pinsi Varghese asked, could you please elaborate the word Palli? You have mentioned the etymological details of the word Palli, and could you elaborate that?
Yes, thank you. I have written elaborately in Malayalam. It is there in my new book. Chapter is there in my new book, Puttan Keralam, Kerala Samskarathinte Baudha Adittara. So that word is a reminiscence of Buddhism and Jainism in South India. Only in South India, we have that word. In Odisha, it is there. In Andhra, it is there. In Karnataka and Tamilagam and Kerala. In these 5-6 states, that word is there as a common affix to place names all over South India and South Peninsula and the eastern part of India up to Bhubaneswar. Nayapalli is a place in Bhubaneswar. Nampalli is a place in Hyderabad in Andhra region. Tiruchirappalli is in Tamil Nadu. Karthikapalli, Karunagapalli, Pudupalli, all these regions are here in Kerala. Even I am sitting in a place called Talayattam by the Periyar, the longest river in Kerala now. So it is the most common affix that you find in toponymy, in place names all over South India, not just in Kerala. So this came to South India through the Pali Tamil collection. As I told you, it is not found in Sanskrit or any other languages. Only in Tamil, ancient Tamil and South Indian parlance of Pali, the Dakhini Pali, the southern Pali, you have the term Palli. So it refers to, originally it refers to a vihara or a place of meditation or worship by the Buddhists, and also Jains also use it. They commonly use now the Basti. Jain Basti is the common word, but in South India, some place names are associated with Palli as well. And this was used by the Christians when they began their journey in South India after the apostle, it is believed, from CE 1st century onwards. It was used by the Christians, and it was used even before the Christians. It was used by the Jews because the Judapalli is the name that was given to the synagogue. All over the world, it is known, the Jewish worshipping place is known as synagogue. But here in South India, it is known as the Judapalli. We have the Judapalli in Chandamangalam, we have the Judapalli in Mala, we have the Judapalli in Mattancheri. Within Mattancheri, you have the black Jews and the white Jews, different. Paradeshi Palli undu, Kartha Judapalli undu. About plenty of, from the Jews onwards, it was used. So it shows the long legacy of Buddhism. Buddhism was here in South India, at least from the time of Ashoka in BC 3rd century. In BC 3rd century, the missionaries of Ashoka, the nuns and monks, they have reached here. They have introduced the Brahmi script or the Dharma Lipi in South India, which has become the mother of all scripts in South Asia as a whole. So the long exposure to Buddhism, the Pali Canon, and also the Dharma Lipi or Brahmi script, these things have created this word, not just Palli, Cheri is also that. Cheri or Seri means the monastery. It was originally the monastic complexes of Buddhism. So Cheri, later when the Buddhists were forced to become untouchables by Brahmanism, and Brahmanism took over by the 8th century onwards, it has casted away the Buddhists. who never submitted to Brahmanism as the untouchables. That is how the abode of the Buddhists became the Cheri. Now the Avarna settlements are called Cheri, the Pule Cheri or the Pare Cheri, and so on and so forth, because they were originally Buddhists. And Brahmanism casted them away. Untouchability was a punishment. It is explained in Who Are the Untouchables, how they became so by Ambedkar. And also in Kerala, this is explained in Dr. K. Sugadan's book called Buddha Madhum Jati Vivasthim, how the caste system was enforced by Brahmanism in Kerala after the 8th century by casting away the former Buddhists who never submitted to Brahmanism. So all the toponymical evidences and cultural evidences are there to see this long-lasting legacy of the Pali, which is used by the Christians, the Muslims, the Jews, and Jains and Buddhists in South India altogether. So it is an anti-Brahmanical, counter-hegemonic legacy that the word entails. Pali, the most sacred space, which cannot be the space of ethics and justice. And justice is the only thing which cannot be deconstructed. Thank you.
Sir, thank you very much. Shall we wind up this Q&A session here, sir? There are a few more questions, but before we wind up the session, sir, shall I invite our honorable patron, Shri P.V. Abdul Wahab MP, for making the inaugural remarks here?
Okay, please do. Thank you very much.
Okay, let's have a brief inaugural session here. Our honorable patron, Shri P.V. Abdul Wahab MP, was supposed to join here yesterday, but as he had a very hectic schedule, he was not able to turn up for this program yesterday. So, as I mentioned earlier, our patron Wahab sir is an esteemed member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, and a former member of Parliamentary Committee for Human Resource Development, Government of India. He is a recipient of UNESCO Confucius Prize for Literacy. He is one among the very few Indians who have been honored in the House of Lords in the British Parliament. Sir, we are really honored by your presence here in this webinar. I would like to extend a warm and hearty welcome to you, sir, to this program. With great pleasure, let me invite our honorable patron and founder of our college, Shri P.V. Abdul Wahab MP, for making the inaugural remarks. Sir, you may please.
Thank you, Shakir. Respected our resource person, Dr. J.S. Shekhar from Kaladig University, Shankaracharya University, and Madam Shirin from ISRO Hyderabad, and participants from across all over the world, and my colleagues, very warm good morning to you. Actually, I'm very happy to be a part of you in this wonderful webinar. Yesterday I couldn't come, but I heard a little bit from the resource person who is from US, Ms. Shankar. And regarding the subject, reimagining literature and culture in the age of pandemic, very, what we call the caption is very nice, especially this time. And a lot of issues came after this pandemic. Maybe so many things for good, and most of them were bad. But one thing is, instead of seminar, it became webinar. That way, I appreciate COVID, because nowadays, even my companies also nowadays are meeting more our officials than before. Before I used to go once in a while, monthly or fortnightly once, meeting all these people all the way going to Cochin and all. From my place, I am from a remote area, Nilambur. But now, nowadays, every week or every day, which any day, if I want, I can meet them and all in the webinar. So that is a good part of the pandemic, which has happened, unfortunately. Anyway, things are changing now. We are hearing that already Russia, this one invented a vaccine. Soon, we will be also having that one. It's already, we know that when a cross of vaccine is ready here in India by Oxford, what you call this company here. Anyway, during this one, I used to hear your comments also, questionnaires. I'm not talking much because I am not much used to this, what you call your department. Especially, I appreciate our department, English department, for making this wonderful webinar in this, especially in this situation. And I am not here to give much lecture to you. I am again. We are having some flood issues where I have to go now itself. Some relief work we have to do. So I am on the way. So I am not taking much of your time and my time also. Thank you once again very much, and I officially, in the name of Almighty, inaugurate this function, wonderful function. Thank you all. Jai Hind. Please unmute.
Sir, a few more questions. Ajay Shagar, sir, a few more questions are there posed by Sir Wahab, sir. Thank you very much for sparing your time to come to this program and to make the inauguration of this program, sir. Thank you very much. Ajay Shagar, sir, shall we continue the Q&A session? Many questions are posed by the participants in the chat box. If we continue, I think we are really having the pressure of time at 11:30. We have to move on to the second session, session handled by B.S. Shireen, Dr. B.S. Shireen. So shall we wind up the session here, sir?
Okay, so we may wind up, we may conclude.
One question is posed by one participant here. Shall I put that question here, sir?
Okay,
could you please answer that question, sir? One important question.
Please. Sure.
The question is posed by Shams. Imagination works as a social force in today's world, providing new resources for identity and energies for creating alternatives to the nation state, whose era some see as coming to an end. What do you say, so? Well, what do you say?
Very relevant kind of suggestion there. It is through the power of imagination we can survive. It's only through alternative kind of paradigms and alternative new visions and imaginations we can think of the future of India, because as we have seen, under the cover of the pandemic, our constitution is done with on a daily basis. So we need to think of alternative imaginations and alternative strategies through very creative and critical and very humane and very, so to say, even aesthetic kind of ways, and other alternatives must be sought out. That is the way out, I think. But collective struggle, politics is also very important that we need to remember, the politics of culture. So that is why I may suggest cultural politics as the politics of imagination, as the politics of the human will, the politics of culture, the politics of imagination may be an alternative. Thank you very much for the suggestion.
Thank you, sir. Let's wind up this session here. I would, on behalf of everyone who gathered here in this program, on behalf of the college, I would like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to you, sir, for sparing your time to come to this program and to give us a very intellectually enlightening talk on the topic, on this very relevant topic it is. So once again, I would like to thank you immensely for this, for coming and sharing your thoughts with us, sir. Thank you very much, sir. So shall we?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and delight, and I thank the department and all the friends and the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Shall we move on to the next session? The session is by Dr. B.S. Shireen from English and Foreign Language University. Am I audible? Sini, let me invite Ms. Sini, Assistant Professor in the Department of English here in Amal College, for welcome this session. Sini, ma'am, please. Over to you.
Yes, sir. I hope I am audible. Good morning, one and all. Welcome to the second session of the two-day international webinar on reimagining literature and culture in the age of pandemic, organized by Postgraduate Department of English, Amal College in association with Kerala State Higher Education Council. So it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of the session, Dr. Zaira Rahman. She's an eminent writer and a well-known artist. She's a former head of the Department of English, SS College, Arikod, and a visiting professor at University of Kannur. She has done her PhD in theatre and education. She has presented papers in various international and national conferences, which include a paper titled Folk Performance at University of Seattle, Washington. And she also presented a paper in the Third International Conference on Education and Social Sciences, Istanbul, Turkey. And based on her solo travel to Turkey, she has written a travelogue titled The Museum of Innocence, Love, History, Memory, which has been published in Madhubhumi Weekly. She has also published so many other articles in various international and national journals. And as an artist, her paintings were exhibited at the Lalitha Kala Academy. Above all this, I should say that she's a great human being with a kind heart, with much love and respect. May I invite Dr. Zaira Rahman to moderate the session. Over to you, ma'am. She will also introduce the resource person, Dr. Sharon B.S. Ma'am, you unmute yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am, it's audible now.
Yeah. You have introduced Sharon a little bit, so I think I will just talk about my interest in what she's doing. She's not just a cultural studies scholar, or she's not just studying literature. She's also studying social formations. So I think it's very interesting that her key areas are gender studies, urban studies, secularism and religion in India, and Islam and women in Kerala was her PhD. So I think she is a very interesting person. I would love to listen to her. I have never ever listened to her, but then I know her from my colleague Reshma. She is a relative of Sharon. So I know her. She has won a fellowship by the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs in the US at the University of California. And her work was on colonial modernity and the evolution of codified Muslim law, which is very relevant and interesting to us Muslim women. And her topic today, I think, interests me too, because eco-feminism has been one of my key interests. And when we talk about feminism, social feminism, we think of social feminism as something that deals with, or that is interested in, or that focuses on labor and capital, whereas ecofeminism is an area that we all have to be talking about, discussing, because it's interested in labor and nature. And we all know that in this situation, in the pandemic situation, scientists are talking about how these pandemics occur due to climate change. So we have to be more careful about how we deal with the environment, and women do that women, there have been movements all around the world where women are so committed to nature. So I think Sharon B.S., our speaker today, is going to speak about how the pandemic can be addressed by women, how the spaces and times are so conducive to such an attempt by women, such a revolutionary move that we have to take up now as women. So I will give the mic over to Sharon. Welcome, Sharon, to this talk, this international seminar or webinar, or whatever you call it. It is webinars now. So welcome, and please, I will not take away much of your time. So please begin. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that great introduction. And before that, I'm audible, right?
Yes. Yes, you are.
Thank you. So I thank the organizers for the invitation and for this opportunity to talk to all of you and also to listen to all of you. And more importantly, it also made me think about certain things, there's some disturbance. If any other mic is on, if you switch it off, it would help us. Okay, thank you. Now it's fine. Yeah, so it made me think about some important questions, some important, relevant, very relevant kind of questions we need to raise at this particular moment. I said important, I said relevant, but then once you listen to these questions or listen to the topics that we are going to discuss in this particular category, you might even think that what's new about it. Yeah, with that apology, I should start. Probably there is not anything new in this, but then what I want to stress at this point or at this moment is there is something important to look at these things which are not new from the new perspective that the pandemic provides us. So these are like the questions that I'm going to raise, the debates or the topic of discussion for the day. It is these have been raised by feminists over centuries, over decades, and we had addressed these questions in many forms, in many ways. But then, end of the day, where we are, or looking back, it is so sad to realize that we haven't moved an inch from where it all started. I might be slightly exaggerating when I say we haven't moved further, but then it is also sad to realize that many of the questions that early feminists raised, they are coming back at us at this particular moment. These questions keep coming back, and something makes it important for us to address this. So the terrain that I want to look at, or the fact, the area that I am going to look at is the domestic space. And I'm looking at the domestic space precisely because this is where the ideology plays out now. This is where everything happens. Even though we have the virtual social space, the pandemic has restricted our social moments, the social life, to the walls of our houses, what we call home. And now sitting here, we try to interact, we try to negotiate, we try to get back to our early routine, then it's impossible because we don't have the same situation anymore. So what are the gender questions that keep coming up at this moment? One thing probably most of you would have thought about when you saw my Hello. Yeah. So one thing that most of you would have thought about at this moment when you saw my topic is about the question of domestic violence. Because if you look at the National Women's Commission's reports these days, or the Department of Family Welfare, their reports, surveys, and a lot of feminists have tried to address this. And in this particular context, like probably we need to address the question of domestic violence, obviously. But what I'm trying to say is, like, I want to look a little further from the question of domestic violence. This is like one concern that at least some of the government organizations, the government wing, have taken up, and they have given us the facts and figures. And obviously, or like, it's not a surprise for many of us to see that the rate of domestic violence is increased quite a lot during this lockdown period and work from home period. And it is like, unfortunately, it is not surprising, because we know what are the ways in which this work in this what are the, like, conditions in which we work, or we live, we inhabit the domestic space. What are the kind of power hierarchies that affect our life? We all know. And therefore, like, I am not dwelling much upon that terrain, not because it's not important, but because it's been, maybe that's the only area that we are, like, now discussing in terms of gender during this particular moment. But I want to look at the domestic space in a little more, like, I would say deeper, put it into a kind of deeper analysis. Let us start with the whole, like, where the whole the whole thing started, where the pandemic comes, and then the government announcements, the first announcement of lockdown, what happened to our workspaces, how it was shrinking. So the first response, obviously, from most of the governments all over the world was to, like, get back to home, and you all stay at home. And then, like, once you stay at home, things will get better in the public world, outside. And then, like, let us practice social distancing. Don't come out unless it is very, very necessary. And I want to start from that particular point, like, so the moment somebody says don't come out, there are certain assumptions that work behind this idea of staying at home. Primarily, the idea is of safety. So the idea is that, like, at home, you are all safe, and outside, there is kind of, like, the virus waiting for you, or all sorts of dangers waiting for you. Might sound a bit, like, amusing when we say it in this particular tone and moment, but think of how safe, within quotes, or the idea of safety at home, we need to, like, talk about it a little more. So what is this notion of safety? And if you culturally look at the construction of Indian feminine, a feminist Indian womanhood, I would say, the cultural construction of Indian womanhood, some of you at least would be familiar with this whole notion of the early modernity's division of inside outside, or people who are familiar with Indian modernity and historical understanding of Indian modernity, you would have heard about the Ghar Bahar concept that the early Bengal modernity was discussing, where, like, outside is where you can indulge, where you can get exposed to foreign culture, where you can, like, engage with people in, like, people of other classes and castes. But inside is, like, a more sanctified space where like interactions are not possible. So you think in terms of caste, you think in terms of gender, you think in terms of nuances. So inside is like, you know, you would say it is the a sacrosanct space of Indian tradition. And therefore now, like, therefore we are preserving this inside, not contaminated from all kinds of things from the outside. So Indian women stay at home even though they are educated, they are middle class, and probably, like, you know, most of my issues that I may raise, or my focus in today's discussion would be based on this idea of the middle class woman. Probably I'm selecting that middle class woman here as a marker because that's the situation I am more familiar with at the time of pandemic, and I feel this is one important moment where we need to talk about what has happened to middle class women in India, because all the while, like, you know, we took for granted that the middle class employed women in India are liberated, and, like, you know, they have achieved the feminist goals, or, like, you know, they have got what they were fighting for. So that kind of, we were all living in that kind of a complacency. And I want to talk about this working, earning middle class woman a little more here. So yeah, getting back to the earlier, like, before I digress, getting back to this idea of Kar and Baher. So let us think about what was happening at the time of colonial, early modernity in India, how we resolved the women's question. Obviously, like, you know, thinking about Partha and a whole lot of other feminists who worked on that area, they try to problematize this notion of Indian idea of Indian traditional, the idea of Indian womanhood. And they tried to say that, like, you know, the resolution that we arrived at that point is not a proper resolution. It was just like, you know, addressing the issues at two levels. So at home, the woman has to behave as the traditional Indian woman, but outside, like, you know, things are slightly better. Okay, whatever. If that's the case, so all these years, how have we kept this sanctified domestic space alive? Because I'm talking about a period, a century before, like the time of colonial modernity, and then coming back to the 21st century. Like, how have we transferred our domestic spaces during this period? What are the changes that has happened at this moment or till now? How have Indian women, I would again like emphasize on the middle class, upper middle class, or upper caste middle class Indian women, how they have evolved during this particular period. I am, even though I said upper caste, I also want to, like, you know, include most of the women who are working, who are, like, you know, working the white collar, like the as governments employees, people in the IT sector, people like, you know, the middle class women. So I'm kind of invoking both the caste and class here. So the middle space. So that women, like, what were the transformations that has happened in the domestic sphere during this turn of one century? And in terms of one question, like, as we said in the beginning, the idea of domestic violence, obviously it hasn't changed much if we look at the facts and figures. But coming back, think in terms of what is the pandemic demanding from women at this particular moment. And women have been, like, you know, conventionally, traditionally looked at as caregivers, and now, like, the pandemic has driven everyone back home. For instance, the child care, which in families with working members as parents, like both mother and father are working, what would happen was, like, they would pay a woman or somebody else of a lower class and get the work done. It was what was happening was more of a substitution. And Bell Hooks has addressed this earlier itself. Like, even before the pandemic, Bell Hooks said most of the middle class feminism, especially the white middle class feminism, what we have achieved over the years is just a substitution of labor. What for the small favors that you get from men who would allow you to work, occupy the public space a little, go to the office, earn a salary. For those small favors, what you're going to how you're going to get these favors is by giving your work to some other woman of a lower class, and then paying a part of your salary to that woman so that you can go out and work. And she called these women 9 to 5 feminists. So from 9 to 5, you will be feminist you will be a feminist in your workplace. You can talk about all kinds of things. You can go work, earn your salary, etc., etc. But at 5 o'clock, getting back to your homes, you have to replace that caretaker, whoever it is, like the caregiver, and then you have to get back to your conventional role. So think again about this idea of inside outside that I was talking about in the beginning, as we divided it during the colonial modern period. Now, this 9 to 5 feminists also come back and take over the traditional, the conventional role. How much have our domestic spaces changed? And many times, and many of us, for instance, we working women, we earning women, we all used to think that things have changed. Now, the pandemic is demanding women to be in the role of the traditional caregiver again. And how are women responding to it? Because the pandemic puts two categories under the most vulnerable category. One is the old people and the other one is the youngest. So children need care, old people need care, and who are the caregivers again? Are these equally shared by men and women in India? I'm not sure. I'm not even sure. For instance, if I honestly ask a question in this, among the participants of this conference, if there are so many men, if I ask them, what is happening at your home at this moment, I would say, if you properly honestly answer, many of you would say there are women who are taking care of things at home at this moment. And now let me continue a bit on this. So this whole idea of caregivers, women as caregivers, pandemic is forcing women to take the role of the caregiver again. For instance, some of these studies that came up during the initial days of lockdown, the government had something to say about this in the beginning. Initially, the government said, government asked men not to treat the pandemic as a holy day. And then they said, women who are bearing the brunt of the pandemic, you should help women to prepare food. And these requests are, I don't think many women took care of this request or responded to this request properly. And the public enjoyment on staying home could easily include advice on sharing domestic load at home. And that was what government did in the initial days. And then they just left it there. They didn't there are records which say, for instance, National Women's Commission said that there is a twofold increase in gender-based violence, and there were government bodies receiving a lot of calls, as high as 200 to 500 in major cities based on domestic violence every day. And there are the sad part of the story is we also talk in terms of sexual assault, rape, child rape, all these kind of things. But we keep saying that now like they are safe, everyone is at home, but we never took into consideration that women in India get sexually assaulted from their like own partners. There are children who get sexually assaulted at home, and none of these have been addressed beyond like the giving out the mere figures. And now when travel is allowed, you cannot go to a hospital, and there are like women who cannot even talk about domestic assault or sexual assault in the atmosphere of the home, not even have the privacy to make a phone call at home. Where will they go, and like how can they seek police help or the public help in this kind of a situation? And there is no way of seeking shelter elsewhere. And counseling centers, there is no point, or there is no possibility of going to counseling centers, and all kinds of things. For instance, and initially when one reason people were talking about giving as a reason for opening up the alcohol shops, where the domestic violence cases have increased because of the restriction on alcohol. So these kind of, and the helpline calls went on increasing, both in terms of women's assault or attack on women and child abuse. And now, like, what did the government or the important institutions in the country do anything related to this? Lockdown is essential and necessary, or was essential and necessary, but at the same time, it was not a very kind of like, nobody took into consideration anything in terms of like, what will happen to the vulnerable categories at this point. And we should make sure that, or like, we should have realized that it is not a gender neutral lockdown. And then like, so therefore, in terms of domestic work, in terms of domestic abuse, or like domestic violence, these were not questions that we could address at that point, and nobody tried to address all these. And I heard that, like, there are places in the West, in countries like, for instance, Spain, in Portugal, in France, government even came out and like, did hotel bookings for women who are running away from domestic violence during the lockdown period. So there was something called Spain and Norway, they adopted something called Mask 19, where a woman who is asking for some sort of Mask 19 is also seeking for help. It became a pseudonym for domestic violence, and this was like, this was given in a study given by somebody from Nalsar recently. So whereas in India, nothing of this was addressed, and like, all on a sudden, women were pushed into kind of the so-called safety nest, and then they were asked to take care of people and also to cope with the all on a sudden changing realities. And what becomes like, it is not just in terms of gendering in terms of domestic work. It is also an assumption, or like, the years long prevailing assumption that home is a safe space for everyone. So I was talking about the middle class women, but let us also think in terms of people who don't fall into the category of our so-called normal. So what would happen to the people who are with queer identities, people who have left home, people who would find institutional spaces as their home? Because there are a lot of students, especially in India, who would have left home due to the issues they have with parents, family, and would think of the hostel rooms as their home, and then would be planning to move from there to a workspace and build their own home. So their temporary homes all of a sudden were locked down. They didn't have anywhere else to go but to get back to the so-called families where they never felt safe. And then the question of third genders, people who would have left home because of, again, like the conflict with the idea of the normal, what would determine their lives, and what kind of safety can we as a population, how would we ensure the safety of such people inside our so-called home? These are, like, some of the important questions that we need to ask. And to come back to the middle class household, if you look at the traditional Indian home, again, we always thought that our issues are resolved. We have like, the working mother, and like mother who brings back, we have this happy go lucky image, we have had this image. And if we look at the 1950s, there is something like, some parallel situation that has happened in the 1950s, or especially in the Western world. Some of you who are doing feminist history, and some of you who are interested in the idea of feminism and its historical development, you would have seen this particular work by Betty Friedan, which is called The Feminine Mystic. So what happens with the ideal woman during this particular period? I want to talk about two works slightly here. One is Betty Friedan's Feminine Mystic, and the other one is Virginia Nicholson's work, which is called Perfect Wives in Ideal Homes, the story of 1950s, Virginia Nicholson. So they talk about the uneven history of competing ideals. On one side, women getting education and wanting to, like, work and explore the world, and the other one, the idea of the successful domestic women. And these competing, conflicting ideals, how women negotiated this, and what was happening to the women in the 1950s. This is where I said it might sound slightly old, or like, repetitive when I say these kind of things, but at the same time, I say it is very important to look at this period, 1950s and 60s, because a similar kind of situation is evolving in terms of feminism, and especially feminism in relation to working women. You look at this picture, which is a photograph by, let me give 1 second. Okay. Yes. This is a picture by Halton Gray, and this is used in the work Virginia Nicholson's work, which I was talking about, Perfect Wives in Ideal Homes, the story of the 1950s. If you are into the habit of watching Hollywood movies, the 1950s women will be like this, like, the woman who is cooking, attending to a call, then look at the house, everything is set properly, and this is how she will be dressed, and like she will be waiting for the husband and children to come back. And this is the picture of a happy home, as you would see in the 1950s, 1960s. And now, like, if you think about the pandemic, what is the difference here? Just that the husband and children are working from another room, like they are working from home, children are in online classes, but the picture will be mostly the same. The woman has to happily take over the household chores and pretend that everything is right about the world, and then go on doing that ideal womanhood job. Coming back, yeah. So this is like, so if you look at the social history of this particular period, what is being talked about in this work, it is so amusing, because 1950s, as you know, is also the it is so much. It's also the period after the World War, if you remember right, and the World War post World War, what happened to women would be like, something very interesting. That is where the feminine mystic, Betty Friedan's work, feminine mystic, also starts. And they're like, the men who come back from the war all of a sudden claim the job, and then expect you to like do behave, because like the men who went for war, they think that they expect or they deserve a proper domestic life and they need to be taken care of. So they go out work, and the reward for men during this period for serving the country ideally is like a beautiful, perfect wife who would take care of home and children. And this happy home in the 50 is a reward for all the toil men did in the war. And this is one thing that emerged from the war during this particular period. And then what happens here is like, the ideal woman therefore should not complain. The ideal woman should not like um, and the house, if you look at in that photograph, it's yeah, somebody was in the chat was pointing out Meryl Streep, the Julie and Julia Meryl Streep place is like mostly like that. And so that is this is exactly what you expect from women of proper kind of how would you say, this is a satisfied household. And now from there, like, if you look at how feminist movement emerged from that point, like, you look at Betty Friedan's work, Feminine Mystic, where she talks about the charms of, like, the so-called cultural the cultural demands on women to be the ideal feminine in this work. And then following which Kate Millett's Sexual Politics comes up, and Shulamit Firestone's work, Dialectic of the Sex. And much before this, as we all know, like Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. So all these were talking about this construction of the feminine at this particular point. But so the ideal cult of the true women in the 1950s, I'm just raising this question, is it coming back to haunt us in a particular way, or is it going to, like, so we thought that we have resolved this question of the ideal femininity. That is where I am heading to. So I'm just trying to, but right now, if you look at the households, is this what is happening? And then, like, from this evolves the woman, the powerful woman who can balance between the professional and the domestic. And this ideal woman, what is happening to this ideal woman in the time of the pandemic is something that we need to talk about. And prior to the modern period, if you look at the pre-modern period, what were, like, I'm talking about those feudal households. They were, the fathers were the heads, and still, like, we have a kind of men as a patriarchal ideology ruling over the capitalist ideology. So the in the patriarchal ideology, you will have the father as the head of the family and as the community leader, and the woman will be subservient. And so if you what is happening at this moment is a collusion of all these. So you can see again, the man is at home, but then there is a kind of struggle for control and conflict and all that. And then further you have the second stage that I was talking about, the period of modernism, where women had to, like, deal with both these, the domestic and the professional. So what we see at this moment is kind of a collusion of these two phases. That's what I was arriving at. And then, like, if we think in terms of the ideal woman, to just come back, the ideal woman who is also kind of like, if we are reading people like Sylvia Plath and some of the later feminist writers, we would know where, like, the idea of capitalism, the commercial, the consumerism, and then like how they come together to give roles to women perfectly, like, the picture that we saw right now, the woman who shop for the family, the woman who cook for the family, the whole thing gets commodified, but at the cost of creating a feminine character out of these women. And now I want to, like, but if this is actually the mistake, or this is the created image, what exactly happened during the war, and how would it be if the women start saying the stories of the war? That is where the picture changes altogether. So on one side, this is the popular imagination, and this is how, like, we want to culturally construct a domesticated woman back into the inside safety of the home during the pandemic. If you come back, or if you just look differently, there is an entirely different story that is coming out. And this is where, like, I want to, like, talk a little bit about this work by the uh, former Soviet Union writer, the Svetlana Alexievich, who talked about this work, the women in the World War. So the work is Svetlana Alexievich, her name is, and the work, she's a Nobel laureate. Many of you must have read her also. So there is this work called The Unwomanly Face of War, where she gives us an entirely different picture of women in the war. So she was trying to say, like, she interviewed a lot of women to talk about the Second World War and women's experience in the war, and the thing that came out of these narratives. So there is little intervention from the other side in this work, and what she gives at this point is like a kind of collection of commentaries, and these women speak uninterruptedly, and some of these narratives talk about women as participants, as nurses, as frontline fighters, as participants in the war, and which is entirely different from how others would imagine female participation in the war. In fact, like, if we have time, I can read one or two extracts, like short 2 or 3 lines. But before that, I want you also to think about how women as frontline fighters engage with the pandemic. Not like, taking care of people at home, not taking care of younger, older people at home. How are they participating as? We have our own example of our health minister, for instance, in Kerala, Shailaja teacher, or we have a lot of women participants, from health workers to ASHA workers, to, like, pilots, to air hostesses, like, as frontline participants in this war. How are these women faring? And if you look at again the survey figures, facts and figures that is coming out from different parts of the world, you would understand these facts and figures are, like, quite surprising, because wherever, like, you might have come across many articles that would give you, like, this shocking revelation that wherever there are women heads of nations, of states, women in charge of the pandemic, things are controlled better, whether it's like this, the Ardern of New Zealand, or Angela Merkel in Germany. Those places, things are, like, handled in a much better way. And and our own health minister is another example. And in these kind of situations, like, so that is where, like, we have these conflicting narratives. On one side, the, like, the caregiver, caretaker come back to the traditional role, and this coming back, what is so surprising, so interesting about, I would put interesting in quotes, because what is so interesting about this moment is like we come back home thinking that it is safe, and we realize that all those things, it is like, that is where everything is kept intact. I mean to say, like, our caste prejudices, our class prejudices, our gender prejudices, all these have been like, kept alive, nurtured in the atmosphere of traditional, I would say traditional, in not in the traditional sense, but I'm trying to say in the conservative Indian household. And conservative, I don't mean it in like, conservative versus modern. I would think most of the upper caste, upper class Indian households, they keep they keep all these nurtured prejudices on caste, class, religious hierarchies, everything is kept intact, are driving everyone back to that household, and how the combinations, the permutations and combinations into analysis from a new feminist perspective. That's what I was trying to say. So if just to come back to Svetlana Alexievich's work, she talks about a couple of, like, she gives narratives from a couple of women. So one woman who was like, fighting the Second World War, there she says, I'll just read out a few lines. She says, after coming back from the war, of course, because, yeah, I should say this. When these women come back from the war, they also feel that, like, they are not feminine enough, because they were exposed to an altogether different kind of reality. And most of these male soldiers, they don't want these women who are back from war as their partners. So many of them ended up a single, like, some of them had left their children back, and children at home, and went to war. So they also didn't have a home when they came back, because children would not recognize them. These kind of situations, the women fighters of the war came into that kind of, like, turbulence in their life. So she says, we have had enough, we frontline girls, and after the war we got more. After the war we had another war, also terrible. For some reason men abandoned us. They didn't shield us. At the front it was different. You crawl, a bullet or piece of shrapnel comes, and the boys protected us. Take over nurse, take cover nurse. Someone would shout and fall on you, covering you with his body. But when we come back, so when you come back, things have changed. There's no one to protect you. And now, as she concludes, like, there were times when they had to make a choice between the opposition soldier and then their own people. And sometimes, like, there are a lot of women who would take care of both bleeding soldiers from both the fronts. And then she says, like, when a woman go to war, or like a woman participates in war, things are different, because, like, there can't be one heart for hatred and there can't be one heart for love. There can only be, like, we have only one. And I always thought about how to save my heart. So that's a women's narrative on war. So I'm just trying to say that, like, so there will be stories in the coming years. We are going to listen to a whole lot of stories about how women participated in this pandemic as front runners, how they were, like, taking active roles. But it is not just that. There are also women in the domestic sphere fighting another battle of, again, like, the gender complacency, the burden of gender roles, or the complacency of gender role. It is like shattering a lot of middle class homes now, and like the women are taking the kind of the burden of it. And it is time for us to look back and see, are we going through the same phase of the 1950s again, where, like, women were supposed to be the ideal, the caregivers and the feminine ideal. or like, are we going to get our lessons from that and think about the world from a different perspective? One thing is like, all our prejudices which is thrown open right on our face. We thought that we were feminist enough. We thought that like, we have shed our casteism and we've become like, modern enough. We thought that like, we are secular enough. But now this is the moment, like, those pretensions are falling apart and nothing is holding things together. So the world is changed, and like when we enter the new phase, how are we going to reconstruct and rethink the world in with these new lessons from here is something very important for us to think of. I'll stop here and then maybe we can have questions.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you so much. I'm so glad I got to listen to you. And we all now know that Sharon is a thoroughgoing sociologist. Her talk reflected that. And she was so genuine that she said, I'm going to focus on the middle class women because she is more familiar with her life experience is related, or it's so nearer to the middle class women. So which is wonderful. And then I like this Andabahar concept that you were talking about, this issue of domestic violence as the time spent in the under spaces, which we thought were supposed to be secure, safe. It is becoming a horror story now. See, women have been talking about this earlier too. There has been domestic violence all throughout. But I think the pandemic has exposed it so clearly that it has become the real, not just data. So everything was data earlier, but now it has become a part of our experience, a real experience. Now, and also you did talk about going back to the fundamentals of feminism. And I think I should start reading Svetlana Alexievich more because our stories need to be told. And taking cue from her, I think women in the pandemic or during the pandemic should start writing their stories. Thank you so much. I think we'll take questions now. Is it time for questions? Simi? Whoever there is?
Yeah, ma'am. It's Shanavas here. Some of the questions posed by the participants have been sent to you via WhatsApp. It is there. It can also be seen on the side screen.
Okay, let me see the side screen because I can't access my WhatsApp now.
Those questions are sent to you in WhatsApp also.
Okay, there is Dr. George Matthew. He's commenting on it. Is that it?
Yeah.
So this question, along with the traditional notion of the ideal feminine, don't we also have an equally problematic notion of the educated, earning, independent, modern woman who is required to be promiscuous? Promiscuous? Okay. The liberal spaces often seem to generate consent and resort to shaming online, and otherwise, when the woman doesn't fit in the stereotype of a radical, read the liberal spaces as university spaces primarily. This is, I think, a kind of comment which Sharon may comment on, or if she wants to pass it. It's okay, but do you want to comment on this, Sharon? Can you hear me, Sharon?
Yeah, I can see Raju's question, Dr. Raju Matthew's question.
Okay.
So I think he's trying to point out that it is not just the he's looking at the binary that I was referring to in the beginning. On one side, you have the ideal feminine, and on the other side, there is the problematic notion of the educated, earning, independent, modern woman. So actually, I was trying to say that this notion of the educated, modern Indian woman, it is like, it's or this binary that we had in terms of the ideal and then the so-called other woman. I think this ideal. Am I audible? Okay.
Yeah.
So this ideal. Yeah. So this ideal itself is wrong on one side, and I am also trying to say that this educated, earning, independent modern woman in some ways was just an illusion. If we look at what is happening, so this educated, independent modern woman is now, she's immediately put back into the role of the traditional caregiver in our modern households, so-called modern households. I'm talking about whether it is like, the university or whatever it is, like, getting back to the house. It is, so we are all, I am not excluding.
The veil has been lifted.
Yeah. I'm not ready, like, excluding myself. I'm trying to say that we are all reduced to the 9 to 5 feminists at some point, and getting back home, like, we realized that we had, maybe some people have, like, slightly more extension. So I am trying to look at how we need to, like, rethink about feminism from this moment, seeing that, like, the feminist goals of the past or the so-called achievements of feminism that we took pride on in terms of equal wages, working space. The moment you get home, it is all over. Is it so? This is what we have to think about. Probably that's what I was talking about more or less today. So I'm just trying to say that home is not just a space. Home is very problematic because it creates the gender hierarchy, preserves it, not just gender, right? That's why I said, like, all kinds of ideas in terms of caste, religion, etc. Because nobody knows what is happening inside, because we have this divide that home is a different space. Now,
and also the pandemic has exposed it.
Yeah, the pandemic has exposed it, and this is the only space we have now. There is no other social again. So, other than what you have in terms of the virtual, I don't know, like the social space is almost absent. So, unless we start from this space, it is going to be. So, that is why I thought we should get back to the earlier feminist questions like the personal is political, etc. once again, because, and it is not like, it's a new moment. It is like we have traveled all these, we have completed the circle, and then we have to begin from there. It's
wasn't this what German Greer was talking about?
I can't hear you. Can you?
Don't you think this was what German Greer was,
Yes, I'm trying to say that, like, we are in, like, almost in 2020. We have read all these as like earlier feminists like Greer or Simone de Beauvoir or Betty Friedan, even before that, Virginia Woolf or Mary Wollstonecraft. I keep saying this to my students because, like, the moment they are in, these are all obsolete books for them. As a student, I used to read Beauvoir with a lot of interest and, like, curiosity. But for today's student, it is not a great word because these arguments are already out there and many of these goals have been achieved. But what I'm trying to say is, like, so we have taken a full circle. We've come to 2020, but now, like, it is a very important moment for us to revisit the earlier feminist works. So we have Zaira Ahmed's Living a Feminist Life in 2020. It's a very contemporary work. But I feel like if you look at Zaira Ahmed's work, what she tries to say is, like, she talks about these reading groups in the university where they used to sit and read early feminist classics. So I feel this is the moment for us to read both. We need to look at the contemporary moment, but it's also a time for us to revisit the feminist classics and to see, like, why is the personal political, or like what have we achieved over the years, and what is problematic about this whole idea of home, etc.
So yes, you must ask ourselves if the goals have been achieved. really achieved, or is it have we deluded ourselves into believing that these goals have been achieved, the goals of the earlier feminists? Yes. I think we have to ask ourselves if these goals have been achieved, really achieved, or have we deluded ourselves into thinking that these goals have been achieved? Yes?
Yes,
Hello?
exactly. That's what I was trying to say, and like, what is problematic in terms of this idea about.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I get it. I'm so glad that you talked about looking at it from both sides, the 2020 version and also the 1950s version. That's really important now. Yes, and our stories have to be told again and again. Some other questions,
Ma'am, the questions are already sent to your WhatsApp. All these questions.
I can't access the WhatsApp. Let me see.
Okay.
Let me see if I can. Please.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
I can see this question on cyberbullying of women who are active in the public sphere, which has become the new normal in the post-COVID times. Can I take up that question?
Yeah, please do. Yes, I saw that. Yeah,
it's asked by Jawhar Khan. Actually, I wanted to touch upon that when I said about the gendered idea of the public presence of women. For instance, if you look at how people are the participation is responded to. So I refer to the health minister, I think, about her contribution in controlling the pandemic and all. And recently, I was shocked to see that in some meme she was called a dancer or something. I was so shocked because we are in the middle of a pandemic.
COVID Rani. She was referred to as the COVID Rani.
Yeah.
COVID
Rani. So that's where we stand, and so this whole idea of cyberbullying of women, and it is especially in Kerala, it's not new. If you are familiar with how Kerala responds to active women who have strong public life, from all political parties, women are bullied more. It's not just that writers are bullied, female actors are bullied. So these are and it's hardly changing.
Yeah.
Parvati recently, it's Parvati was bullied like anything. Recently, there was this issue about journalists whose personal life was targeted, I heard. Actually, I don't know the intricacies of the issue. I didn't read much about it. It's a pain these days to follow. And even the way in which this whole smuggling issue was reported, how gendered our reporting was. So I think it goes without saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. And there is a question about what is the normal. You were referring to the issue of transgenders, and then there is a question asked here about what is this normal in quotations.
I don't know. I was using the quotation in terms of the normal. I was trying to say that, whatever the so-called elite, upper caste, the general idea of normal woman, for instance, like the woman who behaves both as a good housemaker as well as somebody who brings home money. Then we have, we have very normative ideas about the normal in terms of people who behave this way, people who wouldn't throw away motherhood, people who would who have genuine the moment you say a woman, you should be behaving in certain ways. So there is a kind of normal. There is a kind of normal feminist. Like I want to get back to that Reju's idea of normal. Reju's question also, like there is an idea of normal feminist also. For instance, that's where a lot of my work has gone into that idea of the normal feminist, where a Muslim woman in veil won't be a feminist.
Yeah,
You would say, oh no, it's so abnormal to have a woman in veil and call her a feminist. So
Yeah.
I was using the term normal in a very problematic sense. Like, the normal that we think of is accepted by everyone, accepted by the dominant ideologies. That should be the normal. Whereas
There is a question here by Snehalata CA, in which she asks, in one of the press conferences, you refer to that a government official has said that the women in the household should make sure that children takes online classes. Is that an extra burden for the already attributed stereotypical gender role on women? Have you seen that question, Snehalata CA?
yeah, there is a question from Adira UG, which says, to women who believes that feminism is something which destroys happiness of home, who even in this 20th century believes getting beaten is an expression of love. But I want to also say that, in some ways, that's why I said, our idea of feminism is also it has become very normative. We shouldn't think that all feminists are liberated. As I said, 9 to 5 women empowerment. Somebody was correcting me saying it's not 9 to 5 feminists, it's 9 to 5 empowerment, which is true. So feminism is sometimes it becomes a very normative ideology, because I don't subscribe to the idea of all women should be feminists and all that. But I have my own version of feminism, and I am proud to be a feminist. But at the same time, I don't want feminism to be a very normative ideology. In terms of, for instance, all kinds of questions that feminism take up, it has become a very powerful ideology or a very strong ideology in the society. That is if you look at discussions, for instance, it is very important to have a feminist also in discussion. That's the normative feminist, in the sense somebody who fits into your category of feminism, not the problematic feminists like many of us, but there are these normative feminists.
Yeah,
So
feminists who you can target.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to say that feminism is not synonymous with empowerment in many contexts. Feminism has become a very powerful ideology, and in some contexts, feminism has also become something that can bully people. I want to repeat this: feminism as an ideology in many contexts have become a kind of bullying ideology. This is not my words. Actually, there is this author called Janet Halley, and she was working with a lot of these organizations in university. I think she is with Yale Law School, or one of those very prominent law schools in the US. And Halley says, this gender institutions, I would say, the cells that take care of harassment and all that in the universities, the GS cash in our universities, or elsewhere it is known with some other name. This has become a very a strong kind of discourse that they produce. As I said, a woman in veil is not a feminist immediately, so their feminism becomes a marker of your whatever modernity or something of that sort. So Ali says feminism should be aware of its own power in the current situation. Or feminism, so she has this very interesting work which is called Split Decision. And the second part of the title is very interesting. She says, why and how we should take a break from feminism, which I think is also a very significant thing. So I'm trying to say that, we cannot think in terms of empowerment as something that we can impose on people.
That would be strategies. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and we shouldn't impose feminism on people as well. So feminism as that is why I said it is very important to get back to the earlier stages of feminism at this point. We need to read the classics, but at the same time we should have the contemporary understanding of feminism, that feminism shouldn't be normative. So revisiting the classics from this perspective would be very empowering, and I feel it will be a very useful moment for us to revisit that with the contemporary understanding that all women are not the same. Women are different. Women speak differently. Women live differently. Muslim women do not need saving. Dalit women speak differently. With all that understanding, if we revisit the classics, I think this is the moment for us to do that. That's what I'm saying.
The plurality of things which we have to address.
Because those early feminists didn't have that plural understanding of the category of women. And they would never have expected feminism to be a very normative thing, at least for some people, in the 21st century. Now, living in the 21st century, we live in a medley of feminist voices. And now to go back to the classics would be it will be a fruitful venture. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, there is a question here by Twensi Varghese, who says, if not education or employment, then what will liberate women or women?
That's what I'm saying. It should not be the purpose of feminism to think that all women are out there waiting to be liberated. It is the way in which we should think about feminism and think about women's aspirations should be from the perspectives of their identities and their differences. But I can say for sure that if you look at the domestic life of women who we think are downtrodden, oppressed, it would be a lot more better than the so-called emancipated women, the 9-to-5 working women. I'm trying to say, I'm not saying women who are not working. For instance, you think in terms of, I can give you the example of Muslim women because it's an area that I'm familiar with. The idea of spirituality, the idea of religious practices, the idea of the egalitarian notion, at least in certain levels of their existence that they practice, it helps their life a lot. And I have seen a lot of Muslim women who would take part in conferences, in join the public of the community with the help of their partners. I have seen, especially in our universities, I have seen a lot of these couples who will be married, they'll have a child, both the husband and wife will be studying there. And I know a few of them where the girl will go and sit in the library till noon because they're writing their thesis, and then get back, and afternoon the boy will come out because the child is there at home and somebody has to take care. So they share it equally, and they are very religious, and they observe the Islamic principles properly, and they think that it's I'm not trying to say that all Muslims do this, but I'm trying to say that the domestic life of the women whom we think are oppressed are much better than the so-called liberated modern women. Women.
There is a
pandemic would be proving it, right? Also, if we look at the households.
It is not so homogeneous among all women. That's right. That's right. And what you see might not be what you really experience. There is this normative, idea that all Muslim women are oppressed and let's save them. That might not be right too. Right. Now, I think, should we take more questions? I don't know.
If there are any important questions, you can just ask me, read out from the lot given here, because some are comments. So I'm just quickly looking through that.
They are all comments. But Shirin, I want to ask you a question. This might not be really related to your talk, but it is related to your area of work. what do you think of the organizations, political, religio-political organizations in Kerala, which claim that they are empowering Muslim women? What do you think, in your experience, in your work among them? Do you think that it is a really empowering experience for them? I'm talking about the religio-political organizations.
Actually, I have some experience with, again, Muslim students organizations and Muslim youth organizations in the state. What I'm trying to say is, I have been invited to their talks, and I know many of them personally, and I have been a participant in many of their conferences. And in the campus, I see a lot of such students. What I find interesting in the community at the moment is that the youth are reading a lot. Both men and women, they are reading, and they're also trying to get their idea through books and through opening their I feel like maybe that is where the left in the country is losing out at this moment, because of this obsession with secularism, and because of this whole idea of a obsessive kind of tension with identity politics. They are keeping away from the most vibrant student groups in the country. Those must be the Muslim student groups and the Dalit student groups. I have seen that, the most interesting student groups are like these, the categories that I mentioned right now. They are the ones who are reading a lot now. They are the ones who are organizing things, engaging in debates, discussions.
Do you think they are open-minded? Do you think they are open to?
I'm coming to that. So I'm trying to say that, they are, from our perspective, again, from our secular notion, understanding of spaces and all that, probably, there may be lacks, but still I say they are doing it out of their belief and out of their understanding of an ideology. But I also don't think that they're particularly not particularly oppressive to women, as unlike all those other things. For instance, if you look at left organizations, I know a lot of left organizations also, they practice gender disparity, but they would not openly acknowledge it. But when it happens in the Muslim students organization or in a Dalit students organization, it becomes all of a sudden very evident and apparent. And people would say, okay, these people are against this thing. And even in terms of there are some reservations in terms of homosexuality because of religious belief. But I know many of these students, my students, who are active believers, who are participating in debates and discussions, they are open to it. And give them time, and I don't think them particularly oppressive, or they alone are oppressive, and all the other organizations are fine.
Fine. That's not the right view to take.
And many of us have experiences in left organizations. We know, from certain corners, we try to highlight it.
Yeah, what you're saying is it is not so specific to Muslim organizations, the suppression. Of women. I mean, it is everywhere. However, do you think there is some kind of identitarian politics there? Identitarian?
Actually, the whole idea about identity politics, I don't know, if we look at from the left.
I'm talking about identitarian politics. I mean,
can you say a little more, why do you want to call it identitarian?
Because the focus is on the group as an identity, or their ideology as an identity. Not I mean, they are focusing on that and they are pushing it forward, and they are not pluralistic in a sense in that way.
So let me ask you one question. So in what way feminism is different?
No, it is not. We were discussing that feminism is not different. We were just referring to that. In your talk, you refer to that. It's no different. I mean, it sees everything homogeneous.
It also focuses on the identity of women and tries to focus on that.
Yeah, and that's what people were talking against, essentialist stance of women's organizations. Yeah, right. I mean, you were also stressing on that in your talk. I mean, but shouldn't any group be going beyond that? That was what I was asking. Anyway, your talk was very enlightening. I loved it. And if we have any more questions, we could ask them. I mean, I shouldn't be monopolizing this. Where is this question?
Ma'am, shall we come to a conclusion?
There is a question here. Will you please, I mean, that's not a question. I mean, she could get it from anywhere. Will you please differentiate between the concepts of feminine and feminist? Do you want to take that question? Or?
I think she's referring to Showalter's idea of feminine and feminist, where Showalter gives this historical as well as conceptual division between the three forms phases of feminism, the feminine, the feminist, and the feminine female and the feminist. So,
she could get it from you also, right. Okay, Sini, shall we call it a day? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So it was really nice to listen to Dr. Sherin and also how Zaira ma'am has moderated the session. And thank you, Dr. Sherin and Dr. Zaira ma'am. Now I invite Dr. Jafar Sadiq to propose a vote of thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Hello. Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. Okay.
Distinguished speakers, principal, learned colleagues, friends, and students, participants. Finally, we have come to the end of the two-day international webinar organized by the Postgraduate Department of English, Amal College of Advanced Studies, in collaboration with Kerala State Higher Education Council. I, on behalf of the Postgraduate Department of English, express heartfelt thanks and gratitude for all who made this two-day international webinar a great success. I express my sincere thanks to our beloved patron for being the source of encouragement throughout the program. A big thank you, Mr. Wahab sir, for inaugurating the webinar despite of your hectic schedules and engagements. I thank Honorable Principal Dr. Shakir for his support and encouragement. I also extend sincere gratitude to Professor Shankar from Hawaii University, the United States of America, who enlightened us with his inspiring thoughts in his keynote address on foundation truth and metaphor. He explored various nuances of the pandemic and gave us directions to embark on new ways of investigation of the pandemic. I am also extremely grateful to Dr. Ajay Shekhar for his inspiring talk on pandemic and pandemonium, survival through art, culture in states of exception. It was a wonderful session today that we have today. I extend extreme gratefulness to Dr. Sherry for your wonderful talk on gendering the pandemic, questions on the domestic space. It was really a vibrant and lively session. Thank you very much, ma'am. I'm also grateful to Professor Zaira Rahman, who chaired this session and shared her insightful thoughts with us. Ma'am, on behalf of the department, we are so grateful to thank you once again. I am also grateful to all the participants from different parts of the world. There were around more than 600 registration, and as a coordinator of the program, I can say around 250, even you can watch. They, without any break, they actively participated, they responded and commented, and of course, it was a wonderful and lively sessions. Thank you all the participants who made this event a great success. I also extend my thanks to HODs, faculties, and office staff for their enormous cooperation in the organization of this event. Dear colleagues, an event like this cannot happen overnight. It requires a lot of care and support from each one of us. I'm happy to say that this program has boosted my confidence as one of the organizers of this program, since I was fortunate enough to be backed by a team of motivated and dedicated colleagues of Amal, who were well aware of their duties and roles even in this adverse situation. Once again, on behalf of the department, I thank all those members who made this event a great success in the history of